Good morning, Mr. Chairman. The hour of convening having arrived, the Senate will come to order. At this time, I'd like to ask all unauthorized persons to exit the chamber. This time, I'd like to recognize my friend and distinguished chairman from Chickamauga.
Mr. President, it's a beautiful day today at the State Senate, and it's going to be a long day. The men and women are working hard for the people of Georgia. A moment in history, on this very day in 1964, the Milwaukee Braves owner completed negotiation to move the team to Atlanta, Georgia, and the rest is history. Also, the man from Tifton told me today was the day that the hula hoop was presented, and he was a man who did the hula hoop, and in fact he got in trouble and his mother took this wooden spoon to him. The journal's been read and found to be correct.
Is there objection to the dispensing with the reading of the journal? Hearing none, the reading of the journal is dispensed with. Is there objection to the confirmation of the journal? The chair hears none, and the journal is confirmed. All senators who have bills or resolutions, please bring them to the Secretary's desk at this time. Mr. Secretary, will you read first reference and reading of bills and resolutions, please?
Senate Resolution 288 by Senator Albers of the 56th and others, a resolution creating the Senate Consolidation of State Fire Safety Services Study Committee for other purposes.
Rules.
Senate Resolution 291 by Senator Harrell of the 40th and others, a resolution expressing support for employees of the University System of Georgia and for other purposes.
Appropriations.
Mr. President, that concludes the order.
First reading and reference of House bills and resolutions, please.
House Bill 76 by Reverend Stevens of the 164th and others, a bill we title enactment Title III of the OCGA relating to alcoholic beverages so as to specify that counties and municipalities may regulate alcohol licenses.
Regulated industries.
House Bill 132 by Reverend Williams of the 115th and others, a bill we title enactment Article 2, Chapter 7, Title 48 of the OCGA relating to the imposition rate and computation exemptions from
Finance.
House Bill 182 by Reverend Harold 106th and others, a bill we titled enactment Article 1 of Chapter 8 of Title 48 of the OCGA relating to state sales and use tax so as to lower the threshold amount for
Finance.
House Bill 201 by Reverend Hogan, the 179th, and others, a bill we titled enactment Title 52 of the OCGA relating to the waters of the states, ports, and watercraft to authorize the Board of
Natural Resources.
House Bill 212 by Reverend Perkle, the 155th, and others, a bill we titled enactment Article 13 of Chapter 1 of Title 7 of the OCGA relating to licensing of mortgage lenders and mortgage brokers so as to exempt.
Banking.
House Bill 224 by Reverend Williamson, the 115th, and others, a bill we titled enactment Article 2, Chapter 7, Title 48 of the OCGA relating to the imposition rate computation exemption from state income tax.
Finance.
House Bill 233 by Reverend Knight of the 130th, and others, a bill we titled enactment Article 6 of Chapter 4 of Title 26 of the OCGA relating to pharmacies so as to enact the Pharmacy Anti-Steering and Transparency Act to provide
Health and Human Services.
House Bill 234 by Representatives Administration of the 104th and others, a bill we titled enactment Titles 9, 15, 16, 17, and 41 of the OCGA relating to civil practice, courts, crimes, and offenses, criminal procedure, and nuisances.
Judiciary.
House Bill 242 by Representative Hawkins of the 27th and others, a bill we titled enactment Title 43 of the OCGA relating to professions and businesses so as to provide for the regulation of massage therapy educational programs.
Regulated industries.
House Bill 257 by Reverend Scoggins of the 14th and others, a bill we titled enactment Chapter 10 of Title 15 of the OCGA relating to magistrate courts so as to increase the authority by which the Council of Magistrate Court
Special Judiciary.
House Bill 276 by Representative Harold 106th and others, a bill we titled enactment Article 1 of Chapter 8 of Title 48 of the OCGA relating to state sales and use taxes so as to modify the definition of dealer.
Finance.
House Bill 300 by Reverend Smith of the 133rd and others, a bill we titled enactment Chapter 6 of Title 31 and Chapter 45 of Title 33 of the OCGA relating to continuing care providers and
Health and Human Services.
House Bill 323 by Representative Knight of the 130th and others, a bill we titled enactment Chapter 64 of Title 33 of the OCGA relating to regulation and licensure of pharmacy benefits managers so as to add a definition to revise provisions.
Health and Human Services.
House Bill 344 by Representative Gamble of the 15th and others, a bill we titled enactment Chapter 8 of Title 40 of the OCGA relating to sales and uses taxes so as to provide that the mission to advance arts in the state shall not be.
Finance.
House Bill 352 by Representative Reeds of the 34th and others, a bill we titled enactment Code Section 4883 of the OCGA relating to exemptions from sales and use tax so as to change the sunset provision for the
Finance.
House Bill 374 by Representative LaHood of the 175th and others, a bill we titled enactment Code Section 31712.2 of the OCGA relating to regulation or licensing.
Health and Human Services.
House Bill 419 by Representative Knight of the 130th and others, a bill to enactment Title 40 of the OCGA relating to revenue and taxation so as to define the terms Internal Revenue Code and Internal Revenue Code.
Finance.
Mr. President, that concludes the order.
Secretary will now read reports of standing committees.
Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Interstate Cooperation has had our consideration of the following legislation. Instructing the board to stand back to the Senate for recommendation. House Resolution 51 do pass by Senator James the 35th. That concludes the order.
Secretary will now read bills and resolutions for the second time.
Senate Bill 58 by Senator Karen Check of the 48th. Attorney General, written approval that allows for a private person to bring a civil action regarding false taxpayer claims, eliminate requirement. Senate Bill 103 by Senator Davenport of the 44th and others. Air facilities, airports owned by a county municipality shall not assess any fee to a veteran for motor vehicle parking provide. Senate Bill 108 by Senator Martin of the 9th and others. Competencies in core curriculum, computer science in middle school and high school require. Senate Bill 134 by Senator Kirkpatrick of the 32nd and others. Georgia Commission on the Holocaust Commission for administrative purposes reassigned. Senate Bill 138 by Senator Martin of the 9th and others. Disabled first responders certain benefits provide. Senate Bill 150 by Senator Jordan of the 6th and others. Crimes and offenses persons convicted of misdemeanor crimes of family violence, receiving, possessing, transporting a firearm prohibit. Senate Bill 162 by Senator Brass of the 28th and others. Local government disaster mitigation improvements and broadband services infrastructure downtown development authorities provide. Senate Bill 163 by Senator Thompson of the 14th and others. Tim Tebow Act, or Equal Opportunity for Access and Education Act. Senate Bill 165 by Senator Thompson of the 14th and others. Education designation of a nonprofit organization to govern high school athletics in the state provide. Senate Bill 167 by Senator Brass of the 28th and others. Relative search by defects, foster placement for a child educated as a dependent, determine such child's permanency plans provide. Senate Bill 177 by Senator Brass of the 28th and others. General Assembly requirements for consideration of local legislation revising existing districts or creating new districts provide. Senate Bill 186 by Senator Cowser to the 46th and others. Trust qualified self-settled spendthrift trust established. Senate Bill 200 by Senator Gooch of the 51st and others. Georgia Department of Transportation procedure for appealing the rejection of a contract bid require. Senate Bill 209 by Senator Jones of the 10th and others. Individual schools and school systems star rating for financial efficiency eliminate. Senate Bill 210 by Senator Moulds of the 53rd and others. Quality Basic Education Act recess for students in kindergarten and grades 1 through 5 provide. Senate Bill 211 by Senator Harper of the 7th and others. Advertisement and sale of meat, representation of non-animal products and non-slaughtered animal flesh as meat render unlawful. Senate Bill 212 by Senator Martin of the 9th and others. Department of Driver Services criteria authorize certain licensed driver training schools to administer on-the-road driving skills testing revised. Senate Bill 213 by Senator Heath of the 31st and others. Campaign contributions, content of and certain reporting times for certain campaign disclosure reports revised. Senate Bill 214 by Senator Martin of the 9th and others. Barbers and cosmetologists, the number of apprenticeship hours required change. Senate Bill 219 by Senator Jordan of the 6th and others. Education, general educational development diploma correctly answers 60% questions on the U.S. citizenship civics test required. Senate Bill 222 by Senator Stone of the 23rd and others. Criminal procedure, Georgia Council on Criminal Justice Reform creates. Senate Bill 225 by Senator Walker of the 20th and others. Juvenile Code in conformity with the Federal Social Security Act and the Family First Prevention Services Act creating provisions. Senate Bill 227 by Senator Martin of the 9th and others. Special license plates benefit the Georgia Alliance of Boys and Girls Clubs Incorporated established. Senate Bill 229 by Senator Robertson of the 29th. Courts Parental Accountability Court Division to provide alternative education to the traditional judicial system create. Senate Resolution 67 by Senator Anderson the 24th and others. Senator Bill Jackson Interchange Columbia County dedicate. Senate Resolution 202 by Senator Huffstedler 52nd and others. Joint Study Committee on Evaluating Simplifying Physician Oversight of Mid-Level Providers create. Senate Resolution 264 by Senator Moulds of the 53rd and others. Joint Emergency Medical Services Study Committee create. Senate Resolution 266 by Senator Black of the 8th and others. Georgia High School Association assessment of its operations and practices encouraged. Senate Resolution 275 by Senator Untum of the 45th and others. Joint Innovation and Emerging Technology Study Committee create. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
This time, we'd like to take a moment to recognize the Doctor of the Day, and I'd like to call upon the Senator from the 26th to introduce our Doctor of the Day. Caught you off guard.
Mayor, you start on time. Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Keisha Renee Callens. She's a Georgia-trained women's health, public health professional and practicing as an obstetrician and gynecologist with community health care systems in the Jones and Twiggs County office. She serves as clinical assistant professor in the Department of Community Medicine at Mercer University School of Medicine. She is a 2017 alumni of MAG and a 2015 alumni of Leadership Georgia. Prior to moving to Macon, Dr. Callen worked with the Albany area primary health care after completing medical school and residence training with Morehouse School of Medicine. She is married, has 2 kids, and ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to introduce a young lady who's making a difference in rural health care, Dr. Callan.
Good morning, Mr. President and members of the Senate. It's an honor to be here today. First of all, I want to say thank you for your service, thank you for your time, thank you for what you do for our state. It's an honor to have an opportunity to be able to serve you in this capacity today. As you know, advocacy works well in the clinic setting, in the room, but it also works from this level as well, so thank you for all that you do. I will leave you with one quick story before I go. The importance of making your decisions count. So I had an emergency in my office that required me to take one of my pregnant patients to the hospital. It was pretty dramatic. She was bleeding. So we had to ride the ambulance. I rode with her in the back. And as we're going from my office to the hospital, we were driving really fast, but the sirens were not on. And so I said to the ambulance driver, I said, is there a reason we don't have the lights on? Because this is kind of an emergency. And I said, when I get home today, I want to be able to tell my kids I had the full experience riding in the back of this ambulance. And so he put the lights on for me. And so everything that you do, it does make a difference. Make it count. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for your service.
It's my honor today to introduce back to this chamber our former colleague of ours and current Congressman of the 11th District, Congressman Loudermilk. I'd like to invite him up here to give us a couple of words of encouragement. Thank you so much.
First of all, thank you for what you're doing. I'm a little envious of your job because I understand you're on the eve of crossover day, which means you're getting close to the end. One thing in Washington, we figured out there's not an end. It just keeps going and going and going. But we appreciate all you're doing. Look, our founders believed in a government that is closest to the people is the most efficient, the most effective. And I believe that as well. That's why we have a 10th Amendment to our Constitution. One of my goals is to make your job a little more difficult, simply because I want to make sure you got more responsibility than we have in Washington, D.C. over the lives of the people of Georgia. I will tell you this, though, there's something that Republicans and Democrats ought to be very, very concerned over, and it's a bill that will be on the floor tomorrow in the House. It is the biggest, in my opinion, the largest overreach of federal authority and the state's authority, possibly in the history of the United States. I'll be leading the opposition on the House floor for this bill. You haven't heard much about it. It's been rushed through committee. It's being rushed to the House floor, and basically it'll be a federal takeover of the entire election system. For 200 plus years, states have been entrusted to make sure that our election system is customized and tailored to make sure that it's easy access for everyone to get to the poll and cast their vote. When I served across the hall in the House, we instituted the idea of early voting to give more access to more of Georgia voters to make sure they could get to the polls and that their voice would be heard. When we saw that we needed to expand it, we included Saturday voting into that. We've also done a lot to ensure that the people that should be voting are the ones voting and the right folks are showing up to the polls, then they're not stealing votes from someone else. Each state has a little different take on it because they have a different constituency. Some are more urban, some are more rural, and you have to take that into account. This bill would basically take all reapportionment away from the states, and it'll be done by the federal government. It'll also require the states, basically the elections will be determined by the courts because they give a right of standing to anyone who doesn't like the outcome of an election to file suit against an election. The states will be responsible for funding that. It requires early voting, advanced voting. There'll be no more voter ID nationwide, signature verification only, and paper ballot nationwide. No more electronic voting of any form. It would be paper ballot, but the other aspect of it is they allow phone voting. So I'm not sure how you can vote over the phone and have a paper ballot at the same time. The issue here is of the 50 states and 50 secretaries of state that we have, 50 governors, none have been consulted on this whatsoever, and it's a huge unfunded mandate. So I just bring this to your attention because this is something that is concerning to members of both parties. I trust you much more than I trust federal bureaucrats to ensure that we have an equitable voting system, that our access to the polls is access to everyone. And so we'll keep you informed on the status of this. But look, I appreciate all that you're doing. And something else I'll commend you on, even though we have partisan divides, I know after serving here that partisanship doesn't stop us from being friends and working together on many issues. There's a lot that we can learn in Washington, D.C. from what you do here. I appreciate all that you're doing. Our doors are open for anything that we can do to help you guys. God bless you. God bless the state of Georgia, and God bless America. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go down here. It's now time for our morning roll call. It is now time for our morning roll call. Are there any motions to excuse? Chair recognizes the senator from the 33rd.
Morning. I ask that you excuse the senator, unanimous consent to excuse the senator from the 38th for business outside the Capitol.
Without objection, the senator from the 38th is excused. Chair recognizes the senator from the 31st.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent to excuse the senator from the 32nd due to obligations in the Capitol.
Without objection, the senator from the 32nd is excused. Chair recognizes the senator from the 9th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to ask unanimous consent to excuse the senator from the 11th for business inside the Capitol.
Without objection, the senator from the 11th is excused. The chair would like to recognize the senator from the 6th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request unanimous consent to excuse the senator from the 12th and the 2nd for business inside the Capitol.
Without objection, the senators from the 12th and the 2nd are excused. Are there any additional motions to excuse? Secretary will call the roll of senators. Signify your presence by voting the yea switch. The secretary will unlock the machine. What? She waves. It is now time for a morning devotional. It is now time for a morning devotional. All senators, please take your seats and cease all audible conversations. All senators, please take your seats and cease all audible conversations. Doorkeepers, please secure the doors. I'd like to recognize our pro tem to lead us in today's Pledge of Allegiance and to introduce our chaplain of the day.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the Georgia flag. I pledge allegiance to the Georgia flag and the principles for which it stands, wisdom, justice, moderation. Thank you, Mr. President. It's my pleasure to introduce a local pastor from the Second Ponce de Leon Church. He joined the church in 2013 after an 18-year career at Mercer University. Doc Hollingsworth is married to Melissa, who is a retired elementary school teacher, and she is getting her kids' fix twice a week teaching a Bible school. Doc and Melissa are the parents of adult twins, Haley and Brendan. Haley and her husband, Chris, have Doc's nearly perfect grandson, Cooper. In addition to be a pastor of Second Ponce de Leon Church, Doc is an avid golfer, and I say all these nice things about him, but I want you to know that he is a fraternity brother with the gentleman from the 18th, and he is also a Sigma Nu. So I'm sure there are some stories we will find about him a little later today. Doc Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Senator Miller, for this kind invitation, and I am grateful for the privilege. As you learned in the introduction, I'm pastor of Second Ponce de Leon Baptist Church in Buckhead, and former Georgia Tech football coach Paul Johnson is a part of my congregation. I'm not trying to stir up any Tech Georgia stuff this early in the morning, but I am setting up a story. We were at lunch one day, and Coach Johnson said, "You know that your job and my job are a lot alike." How's that? He said, "Well, we both do our thing on the weekend in front of a crowd who all think they know our job better than we do." That might be true. But I said, at least my detractors just fuss over Sunday lunch. You've got to listen to it all week on radio and television. Well, I want to start by saying thank you, because you also do public work, and you do it with constant criticism for a lot less money than a college football coach does. Most of you are spending 2 months away from your business and your family to do the state's work, and I'm grateful. Thank you. But I also want to say a word about how your job and my job are alike, and that we both serve and answer to constituents. In the Baptist tradition, all Baptist churches are self-governing, which means I can get voted out of office at any time. It doesn't even have to be an election year for me. But while we both serve our constituents, we also know that we can't make all of them happy. The critics will always be with us, and trying to make everybody happy makes us crazy. One of the scripture verses from my Christian tradition that helps me stay on track in this regard, the Apostle Paul wrote to the Colossian church, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters." So today we give our best efforts to serve God's loving purpose with honesty and compassion and wisdom and vigor. And then we try to find the wisdom to realize that some people are still going to be ticked off at what we did. But changing the thermostat every time somebody yells "I'm cold" and then turning it back when somebody complains that they're hot will drive all of us mad. Instead, each day we commit our best efforts to do the right things for the most people as working for the Lord. Then hopefully we'll find the grace to let the rest of it go. Would you pray with me? Oh God, we do offer our best gifts to you today. Pray that you would guide our deliberations by your values, kindness and truth-telling and hard work and compassion. May we give our best efforts today as an act of worship to you. May we have the courage to challenge ideas while loving people. And may we on this day operate in your wisdom and love to best serve our constituents, but more to serve your great redemptive project of love among us. Hear our prayer. Amen.
Particularly like the Georgia Tech part, that's why I went to school. Are there any unanimous consents? At this time, do any senators wish to rise on a point of personal privilege? Moving on, you've got a consent calendar of privileged resolutions before you. Does any senator wish to remove a resolution from the consent calendar? Is there objection to the adoption of the resolution on the consent calendar? The chair hears none, and the resolutions on the consent calendar are adopted. Are there any motions to withdraw and commit? For what purpose does the senator from the 51st rise?
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion.
State your motion.
I make a motion that we ask for unanimous consent that SB 173 and SB 183 be engrossed.
Senators ask for unanimous consent that Senate Bill 173 and Senate Bill 183 be engrossed. Is there objection? There's objection. Would you like to speak to your motion? Would you like to speak to the motion, Majority Leader? Like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the most important undertakings we face every session is how to improve the quality of education for Georgia's youth. We know that we have a phenomenal collection of public schools in Georgia that rival the best that you can find anywhere in the United States. We know that every day tens of thousands of happy students head to these schools eager to see their friends and learn new things that will continue to engage them and amaze them for the rest of their lives, helping them grow. This bill before you today in 173 is not for them. This bill is for those who find life intolerable in their existing environment. This bill is for those with specific needs that are better met in programs the school that they're designated to don't offer. This bill is for the children of our brave military members who live here, hopefully by choice, but often because this is where the military said they are most needed. We have children and parents trying to improve their quality of life and want to make sure that they have a guarantee that their kids are going to be better off than they are. That even though they may not achieve the goals that they set forward in their life, that they've given their kids the tools that they need to succeed. I look forward to today's debate, and there will be some discussion on this bill. But it's reassuring to know that we all in this chamber desire that we continue to make Georgia, and especially this part of Georgia, better for the next generation. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the Minority Leader.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Senate, often we engross bills and we don't come down here to object. We just know that our colleagues know a general opposition we have to passing bills out of here without each and every member having an opportunity to protect their citizens, to inform people of a better way to improve the bill. Senate Bill 173 is a major impact on Georgia education. It could lead to devastating results for Georgia schools. And this bill, which was in a subcommittee and heard, had 13 people, 8 for, 5 against, speak to only 3 senators. And then that bill moved to the full committee without an actual vote being taken and was voted out that same day. This rush process has not allowed people to make reasonable improvements to this bill. I object to it for very fundamental reasons. I don't think it could ever get to a place where I could support it because of its impact on public education in Georgia. And while the Majority Leader stated that we are doing great on education, I will challenge that. We aren't doing great. We need to do more, and we need to fight to improve education every day. This bill will not do that. But the engrossment motion prevents us from making reasonable changes to this bill. I know the Senator at 10th had some changes, and he might want to speak to this engrossment, but I would ask each and every one of you today, if, you know, you're talking about waivers, some people are trying to say it's for people, low-income students. Let's make amendments to make that clear. That's not the case now. If you think this is helping some population, let's debate that and then improve the bill. You're not allowing us to do that by engrossing it. I will debate the bill later, but this is not a good practice for Georgia. We should be able to work for our constituents. Do not engross this bill.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 10th to speak to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. President, and members of this great body. I stand with my colleagues from the 41st, encouraging this body not to engross Senate Bill 173 or Senate Bill 183. There's a lot of work that need to be done on Senate Bill 173, and simply because of its implications and the fact that it affects so many students, it affects certainly our budget as well, because what we are talking about is educational dollars. And we are talking about taking those educational dollars that would have been spent in our school system and using and diverting those funds to scholarship programs. And I think all of us in here, and not just those on the other side who drafted this legislation, so have some input on how those dollars are being spent, and I think our voices need to be heard. There's a lot that we have to say about this particular bill as it moves further through this body in this chamber, and I would encourage a no vote on engrossment for Senate Bill 173 and by comparison Senate Bill 183 as well. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the motion? The senator from the 51st has asked for unanimous consent that Senate Bill 173 and 183 be engrossed. All those in favor of the motion will vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the motion, the yeas are 31, the nays are 19. The motion has prevailed. And Senate Bill 173 and 183 are engrossed. We are now moving on to the rules calendar. Will the Secretary read Senate Bill 92?
Senate Bill 92 by Senator Beach of the 21st and others. A bill entitled and act to amend various titles of the OCGA so as to prohibit professional licensing boards from refusing to issue a license or suspending or revoking the license of a person who is a borrower in default under an educational loan issued through the Georgia Higher Education Assistance Corporation or through a federal agency and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Higher Education offers the following step to Senate Bill 92, a bill entitled and act to amend various titles of the OCGA so as to prohibit professional licensing board from refusing to issue a license or suspending or revoking the license of a person who is a borrower in default under an educational loan issued through the Georgia Higher Education Assistance Corporation or through a federal agency and for other purposes. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
Chair would like to recognize the senator from Alpharetta to speak to Senate Bill 92.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senators, I bring before you Senate Bill 92, which passed unanimously out of the Higher Education Committee. All this bill does, it prohibits professional license boards from refusing to issue a license or revoking or suspending a license of a person and borrower that's in default of an education loan issued through the Georgia Higher Education Assistance Corporation or through a federal agency. That's all this bill does, and I would ask for your favorable consideration. And Mr. President, if there are no questions, I yield the well.
You have no questions.
Thank you.
The question is on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection to adoption of the committee substitute? Hearing none, the committee substitute is adopted. Would any other senator wish to speak for or against the bill? The chair hears none, and the previous question is ordered. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none, and the report of the committee is agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Are there any objections? The chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. Shall this bill now pass by substitute? The question is on the passage of the bill by substitute. All those in favor will vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 51, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed by substitute. Mr. Secretary, will you read the caption to Senate Bill 207?
Senate Bill 207 by Senator Burke of the 11th and others, the bill will be titled enactment in Chapter 10 of Title 49 of the OCGA, relating to the Georgia Board for Physician Workforce, so as to change the name of such board to the Georgia Board of Healthcare Workforce, provides the board's membership to provide for current members of the board to serve out their terms of office, to amend the OCGA so as to conform cross-references and for other purposes. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 11th to speak to Senate Bill 207.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 207 changes the name of the Physician Workforce Board to the Georgia Board of Healthcare Workforce, recognizing the expansion of the support to non-physicians to grow our providers in the state. And it also allows the governor to appoint non-physicians to the board for the first time. Appreciate your favorable consideration. If there are no questions, I'll yield the well, Mr. President.
You have no questions. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the bill? The chair hears none, and the previous question is ordered. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none, and the report of the committee is agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Are there any objections? The chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. Shall this bill now pass? The question is on the passage of the bill. All those in favor of the bill will vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 52, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Mr. Secretary, please read the caption to Senate Bill 56.
Senate Bill 56 by Senator Huffstetler of 52nd and others, A bill will be titled Enactment Title 33 of the OCGA relating to insurance so as to establish standards for carriers and healthcare providers with regard to payment under a managed care plan and the provision of emergency medical care, to provide for applicability, to provide for definitions, to provide for certain patient or prospective patient disclosures, to provide for insurer disclosures, to provide for requirements regarding the provision of emergency medical care for covered persons under a managed care plan and for other purposes. Mr. President, Senate Committee on Insurance and Labor offers the following subject to Senate Bill 56. A bill will be titled Enactment Title 33 of the OCGA relating to insurance so as to establish standards for insurers and healthcare providers with regard to payment under a health benefit plan and the provision of emergency medical services, to provide for applicability, to provide for definitions, to provide for certain patient or prospective patient disclosures, to provide for insurer disclosures, to provide for requirements regarding the provision of emergency medical services for covered persons under a health benefit plan and for other purposes. Amendment 1 by Senator Hufstadt, 52nd, and others offers the following amendment. Amend the Senate Committee on Insurance and Labor substitute to Senate Bill 56 by striking lines 33 through 45, inserting in lieu thereof the following. 4. Emergency medical service means those healthcare services that are provided for a condition of recent onset and sufficient severity, including but not limited to severe pain that would lead a prudent layperson possessing an average knowledge of medicine and health to believe that his or her condition, sickness, or injury is of such a nature that failure to obtain immediate medical care could result in A, placing the patient's health in serious jeopardy, B, serious impairment of bodily functions, or C, serious dysfunction to any bodily organ or part, and for other purposes. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 52nd to speak to Senate Bill 56 and his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill has been passed out and it's before the amendment form twice by this body, 52-0 each time. What this bill does is it gives transparency to consumers, and Georgia Watch and many other consumer agencies have supported it because of that. It allows that when there are emergency services that there is a payment method that gets the consumer out of the middle, and the surprise billing, they're called out-of-network billing, 90% of these are in emergency services, and this sets up a mechanism to do that. And then in those that aren't part of a emergency situation, it sets up a dispute resolution for when there's unusual situations that might be there that would allow the insurer and the provider to have a dispute resolution, and it recommends by teleconference it be done. I do apologize for the lengthy amendment, and let me explain how that came about. The last 2 years it had gone out of the Health Committee, it came out of the Insurance Committee. The senator from the 20th said that he would pass it out with the stipulation that there was some first dollar billing that he didn't want to have in there, and we said we would fix that. In addition, the senator from the 53rd had suggested that the insurers and the providers get together and work harder towards some compromises. This has gone on over several days, and those are all things that were asked to be taken out by the insurers to make it more palatable to them, and I think it was 7 of the 9 issues were dealt with in that way. And I think it's been a well worked out compromise on this, and if there are no questions on it, I'll yield.
You have a question. Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 45th.
Would the chairman yield, please?
I'll yield.
Senator, is it not true that the Health and Human Services has worked on what is called surprise billing for several years now, as in about 4 years now? Is that not true?
The senator knows of what she speaks. This has been worked on for 4 years. 3 years we've provided bills out, and I think there has been a better effort this year by all from the providers and the insurers to come to a compromise, and I hope we can do that over in the House.
Would you further yield?
I'll yield.
Is it not true that the objective of these bills and this legacy of work that we've done is to protect the Georgia consumer and to remove them from the process of having to negotiate between the insurance company and the provider, and that we're looking out for the consumer? Is that not true?
Yeah, the chair is correct, and this would, in the 90% of the cases where it's an emergency, would have the consumer completely removed of that. And I think that's the primary objective of this bill. The second most important objective would be the narrow networks. The University of Pennsylvania says that Georgia is #1 in the country in narrow networks. And what we're trying to do is provide a pathway where both providers and insurers have incentives to get those providers in network and keep the consumer out of the situations even when it's not an emergency.
You have no more questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll yield the well.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the bill or the amendment? Let's take up amendment number 1 first. The question is on the adoption of the amendment. Is there objection to adoption of the amendment? Hearing none, the floor amendment is adopted. The question is now on the adoption of the committee substitute as amended. Is there objection to adoption of the committee substitute as amended? Hearing none, the committee substitute is adopted as amended. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Are there any objections? The chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. Shall this bill now pass by substitute? The question is on the passage of the bill by substitute. All those in favor of the bill will vote yea, opposed nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 52, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed by substitute. Mr. Secretary, will you read the caption of Senate Bill 173?
Senate Bill 173 by Senator Dolezal of the 27th and others, a bill entitled Enactment Title 20 of the OCGA relating to education, so as to provide for the establishment of educational scholarship accounts, to provide for a short title, to provide for definitions, to provide for qualified education expenses, to provide for qualifications for students to participate in the account program, to establish certain requirements for participating schools and service providers, to provide for accounts and account funds, to establish a parent review committee to review expenditures upon request, to authorize the Governor's Office of Student Achievement to promulgate rules and regulations, and for other purposes. Mr. President, Senate Committee on Finance offers the following substitute to Senate Bill 173, a bill be titled Enactment Title 20 of the OCGA relating to education, so as to provide for the establishment of educational scholarship accounts, provide for a short title, to provide for definitions, to provide for qualified education expenses, to provide for qualifications for students to participate in the account program, to establish certain requirements for participating schools and service providers, to provide for account funds, to establish a parent review committee to review expenditures upon request, and for other purposes. Mr. President, a minority report has been filed and will be distributed.
Chair would like to recognize the senator from Forsyth County for the first time to speak to his first bill, Senate Bill 173.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the chamber. It's an honor to stand before you with my first bill. They told me to keep it simple. On your first bill, we've done just that. And the law of politics in general is do it for the children, and we're doing just that. So with that, I bring you Senate Bill 173. 173 establishes educational scholarship accounts or education savings accounts. We'll refer to them as ESAs for the rest of the day, that allow parents and students to develop a customized education plan that best fits the needs of their student. Essentially what they do is they allow the state funding to follow the child into a variety of optional educational experiences such as homeschooling, hybrid schooling, online schooling, virtual schooling, private schooling, home tutoring, etc. If you look at page 3 of the bill, we identify who this is for. Lines 61 through 87. We have some priority categories in the bill, including families with incomes below 200% of the federal poverty level that are currently enrolled in a public school, a student who has been adopted from foster care, students of parents who are on active duty military service currently stationed in Georgia. A number of disabilities are covered if the student has an IEP. And then finally, the final priority category is a student who has a documented case of being bullied in a public school. After all of those priority categories are met, the ESAs are available to any student who has attained 3 FTE credits in a public school. And this is all subject to a cap. The cap is, for the first year, is 0.5% of all students, which would be just shy of 9,000 students at full enrollment in the program. The cap increases by 0.5% every year for 10 years, at which point in time it maxes out at 5%. Lines 129 outline what participating schools must be. Lines 164 on outline the funding mechanism. And then finally, starting at lines 224, we establish parental committees which help oversee the program along with the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. With that, Mr. President, if there are other questions, I will yield the well.
You have a couple questions. Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 28th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, will you yield?
I would love to, Senator.
Senator, can you explain the marginal cost for adding or subtracting a student and how it relates to state funding?
Thank you for your question, Senator. This is an important note and probably the crux of the bill. A couple folks have asked me questions on this bill. And what I think is important to note with this bill, Senator, is that when a student leaves a public school, for whatever reason today that they would leave without this bill, the QBE funding for the student goes away with that student. So if we establish that schools, if they were to lose 1 student or 10 students or 100 students, all lose that QBE funding, then what we must do to establish what the impact is on the public school is to look at the economic theory of marginal cost. And the economic theory of marginal cost is at play across all businesses. It is also at play across most of our governmental institutions and certainly education. And marginal cost answers a simple question. What is the cost to add a student to your school? And what are the savings derived if a student were to leave your school? And really, this was a big question for the state of Georgia that we did not have an answer to until just last month. And last month, Jeffrey Dorfman, who's a professor at UGA, released a county-by-county study. And he laid out the marginal costs for all of the counties in Georgia. And again, the marginal cost would be the savings experienced by a school or the cost incurred by a school with the addition or subtraction of a student. And what he found was that in 159 out of the 159 counties, so at every county in this entire state, the marginal cost exceeds the state funding. So if a student leaves the program and their state allotment of QBE leaves with them, we know 2 things. One, the average expenditure per pupil actually increases. And since the marginal cost is higher than the actual QBE funding, there is ultimately a savings to the school system. Now, I think it's important to outline here as well, Senator. School choice has been discussed in this chamber for a number of years. And there have been various responses to that school choice discussion and various predictions of success and various predictions of doom and gloom. And one that I would like to highlight to you from a newspaper came from a former minority leader in this body. And this is from 2008. And the minority leader at that time said in the newspaper, "What they're saying is, by spending taxpayer money on a child, you save money because that child is no longer in a public school," said House Minority Leader. That's outrageous. This study proves that that not only is outrageous, but it is absolutely true. Senator, may I ask you what county you are from?
Senator, you're not allowed to ask questions, but Senator, is it not true that I'm from Coweta County?
Thank you, Senator, for being gracious with me. And I believe that it is true that you are from Coweta County. So looking at Coweta County, the marginal cost per student is $9,808. The QBE funding is $4,621. The delta between those two numbers, if my mental math is correct here, we're looking at about $5,200 would be the savings per district. And again, this is the study released last month, done by Jeffrey Dorfman, where he looked at every.
And will you
county.
further yield?
I will.
And is that number because the federal funds and the local funds stay with the school? Am I understanding that correctly?
That is correct. As you know, our QBE model, really, we've got 3 buckets of funding for our QBE model. We've got our state funding, which roughly, it depends on the district, but it's roughly 50% of the bucket. You have your local funding, which is approximately 40% of the bucket, and 10% of the money is the federal money. Under this bill, the local and the federal money stay at the school. Now, the reason for the marginal cost savings, obviously, is that the state funding does not cover all of that cost. And so if the other buckets of money stay on a per pupil basis, that's where Dr. Dorfman gets his numbers.
And would you yield for one further question?
I will.
Is it not true if the student were to leave for any reason under current law, that under the state funding for Coweta County is $4,621, that money would leave that school no matter what under current? Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator. Whether you have 1 student or 10 students or 100 students leave the school next year, whether it's due to natural attrition from them moving, whether they're homeschooling, whether they're going to private school, whether they are leaving for another reason, the funding goes with the student. QBE is not a static number. So yes, thank you for your question.
Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 6th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
I will.
Now, in terms, isn't it true you're from Forsyth County, correct?
It is true.
And you represent Forsyth County.
Indeed.
With respect to that, there are 17 private schools and 28 public schools in Forsyth County, correct?
I believe the senator knows of what she speaks.
So when we talk about ESAs, or these education savings accounts, what we're saying is that the state is going to put approximately $5,500 to $5,600 into an account that student can then take to a private school to pay for tuition, correct?
What we're saying with education savings accounts is we are allowing the parents and the children to work together to achieve a customized solution. So as technology continues to evolve, we have more and more school choice options that are available to those families, including virtual school, including homeschooling, including group schooling, including tutoring programs. In other states that have ESA programs, what some families do is they hire a tutor for language arts, they hire a tutor for math, they bring those students into their home. For Forsyth County, just to clarify, the number would be $4,264.
Will the senator continue to yield?
I will.
So with respect to that, whether it's tutoring or special services or whatever, in terms of private schools, what we're saying is we're going to take that money, that public money, and then we're going to put it into an account and let folks use it how they would like to in terms of private school education. Private schools that are not subject to the same criteria that public schools are subject to with respect to accountability. Is that not correct?
That is not correct. Private schools, you are correct in stating that the private schools do not have the same state-mandated, state level of accountability. However, what I would say is that I believe the free market, with the accountability of the free market, provides, in many cases, a more powerful form of accountability in that there is not a monopoly and a guarantee of that private school staying in business. So were the private school to fail the students over time, I believe that private school would also go out of business.
Will the senator yield?
I will.
In terms of a market or a monopoly or the free market, we're not talking about the free market, though. We're talking about public dollars that are going to be sent to private entities that aren't subject to accountability apart from the free market that you're talking about. Is that not correct?
Senator, I've been in this body for, I believe it's 27 days, and I've seen us send a lot of money to various private entities. And I've seen us approve spending that would go to a number of private entities, and I believe the principles here are the same. And the principle here as it relates to education is we are in the business, ultimately, at the end of the day, our goal is not simply to send children to school. Our goal is to educate children. And what this bill captures is the idea that students and parents know what is best for that student. I believe that public schooling is probably the best option. I'm going to throw a number out there for 96% of our students. My children are in public school. I attended a public school. My mother was a lifelong public school educator. But what I recognize as a parent is that for my kids who are not yet in public school may not necessarily be the best fit for them. Right now we have, Senator, I think that you would agree with this, we have, when it comes to school choice, we have segregation. We have the haves and the have-nots. And right now, for those of folks that have the means to exercise school choice for their families, they have the ability to do that. However, there are many families in Georgia, which is why we have the priority category in here for families up to 200% of the poverty level. There are many families in Georgia who do not have that choice. And this is empowering those families who do not have the financial means necessary to provide for the best education for their student to do so.
Will the senator yield?
I will.
With respect to the haves and have-nots, I'm glad you brought up the 200% federal poverty line. So in the city of Atlanta and the metro area, which Forsyth County is actually counted, the average private school tuition is approximately $18,000, okay? So then if we take off this amount that the ESA would allow for in terms of a family to use, then we're looking at about $13,000 that a family would have to pay out of pocket for each student that goes to a private school, correct?
I assume the senator knows what she speaks on the cost. I have not priced out private schools in the city of Atlanta.
So when we're talking about actually empowering folks, the have-nots of the world, in order to make a school choice, in order to send their children to these private schools, what you're saying to me is that a family of three that makes $40,000 will need to then spend $13,000, which is over 30% of their income, just to place one student in a private school, and if they put two, it would be over 50% of their income?
That's not what I'm saying, Senator, but if you would like to increase the funding available through this bill, I would be amenable to an amendment to do so.
Well, it's been engrossed. I would like to amend it all up and down, but it ain't going to happen today.
I'd be happy to work with you on the House side to get that amended. If you want to increase the funding, I'd walk arm in arm with you to the House to make that happen.
Will the senator yield?
I will.
Now, it's interesting because we have today a fiscal note on our desk from the House bill version of the bill. But when in committee, when you were asked about this, you said that a fiscal note wasn't necessary because it was revenue neutral. Is that not correct?
That is correct, Senator.
Would you agree with me that the fiscal note would indicate that this is not a revenue neutral bill at all?
I would agree with, I would say to you that the fiscal note does a number of guesses. And the guess that the fiscal note makes is it says if none of these students were to leave public school, if a certain percentage of these students were to leave school otherwise, and I jumbled that sentence, you'll have to forgive me, but it attempts to predict how many students would otherwise leave public school who would otherwise lose the QBE funding. And that is just a number that we do not know and a number that we never will know. I would submit to you, Senator, that the bulk and perhaps all of these students who are going to leave for private school who have the ability to do so under the current law have done so already. What the fiscal note does not include is a 0% estimate that would answer the question of what if none of these students were otherwise leaving public school?
Will the senator yield?
I will.
You will concede that the fiscal note says that at its max capacity, that this bill is going to cost $542.6 million to the state of Georgia, correct?
The fiscal note attempts to provide various estimates for what the cost would be if those students would leave the public school under natural attrition. The fiscal note does not have the capacity or the ability to accurately predict that number.
Will the senator yield?
I will.
Is it not true that we don't even have enough money in the budget to cover the promised teacher raises from the governor, and now we're pushing a bill through that could cost almost $600 million to this state and drain money from public schools from North Georgia to South Georgia and everywhere in between? Is that not true?
There's a number of things about that statement that are not true, but I'll start with the first one, which is that we're not passing the promised raise. I've seen plans for the promised raise. I've also seen expansions of the raise to include those who are not initially included. As far as draining funds from public schools, again, you and I just have a fundamental disagreement on that. I go back to the report, the quote from the minority leader. You and I were not here at the time, but when the minority leader made the statement, and I will return you again to the Dorfman study, which shows that if these students leave the public schools actually save money because they do not have to provide those services under the marginal cost.
Will the senator yield?
I'm going to yield for 2 more questions, Senator.
In terms of the IEP, do you know what IEPs are?
I do, ma'am.
Okay, so they're currently funded with federal funds now as well as state funds. That's a correct statement?
That is a correct statement.
When a student leaves a public school and goes to a private school, those federal funds do not follow the child. Is that correct?
Under the current program, under the current ESA program, voucher program?
I'm just saying, period, in terms of federal funds. They don't follow the child to a private school. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so with respect to an IEP, if a child transfers to a private school and that IEP cannot be covered by the funds that are currently there with respect to tuition, who's on the hook for that?
I'm sorry, could you ask your question again? I'm not following what you're asking.
There's a gap, right? Federal funds make up that gap usually with respect to an IEP. Federal funds can't go to a private school. So who's going to cover that gap with respect to not being able to provide the appropriate IEP to these students
In the private school?
in the private school?
I think that's a great question, Senator. And I think rather than talk about theory, I'd like to talk about Cameron Smith. Because Cameron Smith takes theory and makes it reality. And as you know, when we passed the disabled student voucher program back in 2007, we heard many of the same stories of doom and gloom. In fact, anytime we ever discuss anything with school reform or school choice, we hear stories of doom and gloom. The stories never come true. We heard stories of doom and gloom in this body in 2007. We heard them in 2012. We heard them last year with the expansion of the SSO program. Cameron Smith was so excited for the voucher program that we have currently that he applied to schools before the legislation was even signed, hoping the governor would sign it. Cameron was a 6th grader, and he had cerebral palsy. His mother was concerned about Cameron going to middle school. He did fine in elementary school, but she was concerned, the way that middle school, being what middle school is, that he would be bullied in middle school. So he was able to enroll in the school. His family, to your point, Senator, did not have the funding to provide for all of the cost of the private school. What his mother said was that while the public school education on the elementary level was great, I found the middle and high school programs lacking after visiting a couple of schools. I'm not sure he would be doing it as well had he not had the opportunity to attend Catholic schools for middle school and high school. His funding from the state did not cover the full amount, but he got financial aid. So we have a number of programs, not only the SSO program that we passed in this body last year, but other scholarship programs that are available to students like Cameron. You'll be happy to know, Senator, that Cameron graduated magna cum laude with a bachelor's degree in fine arts and musical theater from Reinhardt University last year, and is one of the many success stories that we have in the state of Georgia that have come about through our current limited school choice option. And what this bill does is expands that so we can have a lot more stories like Cameron's to tell 10 years from now.
Will the senator yield?
Senator, I will yield for one more question.
And point of parliamentary inquiry, sir, I don't think that once you start answering questions, you can just cut it off when you don't want to answer anymore. But will the senator yield?
I yield.
In terms of what you're talking about in terms of the special needs voucher, I don't have a problem with that. My problem is with the bill right in front of us. And in fact, we've already spent in fiscal year 18, 28 to 29 million with respect to the special needs voucher. And then, so the question then, what is even the interplay in between the two of them? Does this supersede that now?
This would not necessarily supersede that. This would allow similar students additional choice.
Additional money?
As you know, no ma'am. As you know, Senator, the current program for our special needs students is a pure voucher program. This is an education scholarship account program which has a number of differences from a true voucher program. First and foremost, vouchers by definition are only available to be paid directly to private schools. This program would allow the parents and the students to spend the funding as they see fit. For example, this program would allow a blind student to buy a Braille book for his or her homeschooling that they would not be able to do under the current voucher system. But also, this does not have the use it or lose it restriction that the current voucher program has either. And to the point, I've seen a couple senators reference limiting the number of questions, which is the only reason I'll do that.
As a point of order, the rules do allow the senator in the well to decline taking questions, and then move on to another senator.
I'm a big fan of the senator from the 6th, so I'm going to have one more question.
One more question. Isn't it true that a vote for this bill will impact local school districts' 5 mil share and will then likely result in higher property taxes for homeowners in these districts?
That is not true, Senator. I'm going to pull out a little chart that I have here from Forsyth County Schools. And again, some of this gets lost in legislative council language, but the chart that I have here from Forsyth County tracks the FTE through salary to operations to QBE earnings, less local 5 mil share, and then finally, the state funds. The state funds are net of or after the 5 mil share. The intent of this bill, as it is written, is to ensure that this comes after the 5 mil share. The payment to the student comes after the 5 mil share.
Will the
Chair
senator yield?
recognizes the senator from the 29th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, do you yield?
I do.
Senator, while I've enjoyed the banter back and forth, my biggest concern is what is the impact on the individual students if this passes?
That's a great question, Senator. You know, we can look at other states. The beauty of this country is that we have an incubation lab in every state in this union. And we have a number of states that have implemented ESAs already, and we have a number of states that have implemented voucher programs. We have a number of states that have done everything in between. Greg Forster has reviewed 100 existing academic studies, 100 studies, to look at the effect on private choice programs. He used gold standard methodologies that require empirical evidence, and he found that, quote, overwhelming good news for these programs, that with 87 studies showing positive effects, 10 studies showing no visible effect, and only 3 studies finding negative effect on students. And he goes on to further break that down into 5 separate categories. As far as academic outcome of the choice participants, so those students who are taking part in the program, 14 studies showed a positive effect, 2 showed a neutral effect, and 2 showed a negative effect. For academic outcomes, and this is important, of students remaining in public schools, 31 studies showed a positive effect, 1 showed a neutral effect, and 1 showed a negative effect. For the effective choice programs on racial composition of schools, 9 studies showed a positive effect, 1 study showed a neutral effect, 0 showed a negative effect. For the effective choice programs on student civic values, 8 positive, 3 neutral, 0 negative. And finally, choice programs' fiscal impact on taxpayers and districts, 25 positive, 3 neutral, 0 negative. So we have multiple studies underscoring, and the most recent one being this Georgia study that I've mentioned at length this morning, underscoring and really negating the fiscal argument as it relates to the local school districts.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 42nd.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
I will.
Thank you. I'm trying to understand the categories that are listed on page 3 of the bill. I believe earlier you mentioned that they were priority categories.
Thank you for the question, Senator. So you have subsection A, and then further down subsection of that, subsection 2. A, B, C, D, E are all priority categories. And then it is open to F, which would be any student who is currently enrolled or earning 2 FTEs in a public school.
Perhaps I missed it, but where does it say that those are the priority categories over section F?
I believe it's in the next section, Senator, and I will look for that with you.
I'm sorry?
That's in the next section, I believe, and I'm going to look for that in real time
okay.
here to help you
Thank
out.
you.
So give me just a second. I found it, Senator.
Okay,
If during enrollment period, the office, this is line 102,
line 102.
the office receives more applications than is permitted under this subsection, the office shall give equal priority admittance to students qualifying for an account pursuant to subparagraph A through E of paragraph 2 and subsection A of this code section, and admit students who qualify for an account pursuant to F, paragraph 2, which is the catch-all, we call it the open enrollment of this code section, for any remaining spots through the use of a random selection process. So if the program is oversubscribed, we're going to hit those priority categories first, and then all the students remaining would be in a random selection process outside of that.
Senator, don't we already have a program that is utilized by special needs students? So that's already well taken care of under our existing program.
We have made good strides. I mentioned this to the senator from the 6th as well. That program is a voucher program. That is not an ESA program. So, for example, the ESA program would not necessarily allow a parent of a blind student to homeschool their children and buy Braille books. That's an example I used earlier. That would not be applicable under the current program.
But isn't it true, Senator, that since we already have a program taking care of these priority categories, it does lead one to a conclusion that, in fact, it would there would be a lot of spots left in the catch-all section, which opens it up to anybody.
Certainly, Senator, the bill does open it up to anybody because this bill envisions providing choices and options to all Georgia students up to the cap to allow the parents and students to customize their education. However, I would encourage you not to lose sight of the fact that we also include in here the priority category of students up to 200% of the federal poverty limit, those who have been adopted from foster care, active military duty, and those who have documented a case of being bullied. I don't have a study nor a prediction, to be honest with you, as to how many of the students would apply for this program. My personal opinion is that the largest applicants from this program will be from Category A, because those are the students right now who may need a customized education, but they may not have the financial means to be able to attain it.
Will the senator continue to yield?
I will.
Orthopedic impairment. How would you categorize that?
Senator, I would categorize that, and I'm not necessarily sure if I'm sure that's codified in other sections of our law, but I would classify that, from those who have an issue walking, getting around, a paraplegic, a quadriplegic, somebody who's, I have a friend of mine who I know that was born without any arms and without any legs. And I believe that Nick, who is my friend, has an orthopedic impairment.
Do you think that that could be any kid that wears orthotics?
I do not believe that would be the case.
I wonder why do you think that?
Because I believe that that is not an impairment. My son wears orthotics, and I do not believe he's orthopedically impaired.
Well, exactly. My son did for many years too, and we can find out further information on it, but it would seem that that is some kind of orthopedic impairment. You know, they had to go to be serviced and measured and had their feet have a prescription for that. So I don't know that I agree with you about the orthopedic impairment.
That I have contact lenses on currently, but I do not consider myself blind.
Looking back at this list, and this kind of goes back to what we were discussing with the senator from the 6th, the average private school in our region probably does cost around $18,000, as she was saying, but are you aware that schools that treat kids that have even just basic speech language impairment or emotional and behavioral disorder or autism run far more than that? They're in the $35,000 to $40,000 range because they typically wrap in speech and occupational therapy and other high-priced services, and so the private school tuition for those schools is quite expensive.
That very well may be true, Senator, but it sounds to me like you're arguing for an expansion of my bill and the expansion of the funding through the bill, but I'm comfortable with where the funding stands today.
But Senator, my point is that in order to be able to afford to go to one of those schools, you're not really helping the people that are 200% of poverty or less, because there's no way that these families can actually have access to these private schools based on the amount of public funding that we would be providing in this bill, which again, my question then again would be, isn't it then the case that really this voucher would go to helping people in Section F who are folks that may or may not want to go to private school anyway, and so then it's kind of a big taxpayer giveaway.
Now, Senator, I'm confused why you would say that when I just told the story of a student who does not have the financial means and did not have the financial means possible to attend a private school through the current voucher program. But since I fell short in my explanation, I apologize for that. I'm going to talk about another example. I'm going to talk about the 30314 zip code. Now, I've actually been involved with some organizations who are working to solve the generational poverty in the 30314 zip code. And Senators, I'm sure you know, it is the poorest zip code in the city of Atlanta. 6 out of every 10 murders occur in this one zip code. It's the 5th most violent block. It contains the 5th most violent block in the entire country. 40% of the people live below the poverty line. 14% of the public schools in the 30314 zip code are chronically failing. Bright Futures Academy is a private school in the 30314 zip code. And it is full of students who are taking advantage of our SSO program. So through programs like SSO and through other scholarship opportunities coupled with this program, we are going to be able to continue to see schools like Bright Futures open and service areas that are suffering under rampant poverty, such as the 30314 zip code. So I guess, Senator, I would just have a different view of this, looking at the data, looking at the stories that we've seen. While this may be able to help some families go to private school that may be above 200% of the poverty line, this certainly is going to be able to help those who need it most, which are those that are under 200% of the poverty
Will
line.
you yield for one more question,
Senator, your time in the well, allotted time in the well has expired. Chair recognizes the minority leader to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about this bill. First thing I have to do, and I'm not sure the Senator from 27th might be able to send me a sign, but he mentioned the minority leader in 2008. I thought he said the Senate minority leader. That was Robert Brown. And I'll tell you this about Robert Brown. He was a fighter for public education, and he knew this was a bad idea. He knew it because he served on the Bibb County School Board for a number of years. Before coming to the Senate, he had been in the trenches in the school systems, and he knew this was a bad idea. He worked as a floor leader for Governor Miller, who all of you know was a champion for education in Georgia. He was the one to put teachers' pay raises back up to where they needed to be in the 1990s, and then would have sadly seen us actually cut the buying power of teachers by over $500 million in the last 15 years. But he was a champion for education, and he did not pass legislation like this. Robert Brown knew this was a bad idea. And I urge all of you to look hard at this legislation. What this legislation does, without regard to helping poor people or people with disabilities, this allows almost anyone really, to take their kid and take this money out of the public system and send them to private school. As senators and asked other questions have already brought forth, private school tuition at a quality school is above the amount of money that they will be getting from these voucher programs. That means that more people will be going from higher income families to these schools. And you say, well, is that really bad? You know, at least we help some people. The fact is, it is bad. It's bad for school systems throughout Georgia who have to calculate every year how many students will be on their count. They have to provide the infrastructure in the schools and the transportation and electricity for all these students. It's bad news. Also, contrary to what the author presented, it will actually cost local school systems money. When the QBE share is counted, local system makes up about 5% of that. That will be going to these students the way this bill is presently written. Maybe unintended, but it is there. It will actually take millions of dollars from public systems and from kids that are staying in those school systems. Bad public policy, it's bad for Georgia's future, and it's bad for Georgia's children. In Wisconsin, we saw property taxes of local homeowners go up when a similar program was implemented because they needed to make up the lost revenue for the kids that were still in their local schools. That's something you will see, and it will not make your local voters very happy when they have to make up those lost revenues. We will also see challenges and problems with these private school systems, whether it's religious issues and turning down some students who want to go there. We will see more segregation, which is problematic. You know, this is not the way to build a holistic school system that helps every Georgian and every child in our state. This is not fulfilling the commitment we have to make sure every Georgian is well educated. You know, we have a lot of other challenges. You know, the governor tried to find money for education this year for teachers, and we fell woefully short from what he had promised, and actually had to back off a little more since session started. We see over the past decades where we cut transportation funding and health care for some school workers that local school systems are under a strain and a pressure today. We should not move forward with this legislation and put a greater burden on local schools and local teachers that is not necessary and not beneficial to the majority of children in Georgia, most of the children in our state. The author of the bill came down here and said, let a parent make the decision. Well, I put to you that we must look at all the children all the time. And a parent, one parent may make a decision that this is good for their kid. But if that decision takes money from 10 other children and hurts their educational opportunity and set them back, then it is not something we as policymakers should accept, endorse, or support. And our voters and the constituents will remind us of that fact someday in the future. I urge all of you to take a deep breath and know why Democrats and Republicans who have controlled this chamber for 30 years of either party have not already passed this legislation. It's been passed in other states and they have seen problems. You know, I could bring up Cleveland. I could bring up other places and other problems that have arisen. But I think most of you, enough certainly to defeat the bill, know that this is a bad idea. I ask you today, find the strength to represent all the children in your schools, all the children in our state, and oppose and defeat this measure. Thank you very much.
You have questions.
I yield for questions.
Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 1st. He waves. Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 39th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
I yield.
Senator, my question was originally from the sponsor of the bill but since he is no longer in the well, then I'm going to ask you to try to help me through some of these concerns. Is it not true that I represent and live in the zip code 30314?
That is absolutely true, Senator.
And is it also not true that I have a young son, my Carter Cakes, who will be starting at Atlanta Public Schools in August in a Georgia State pre-K program?
One of the most well-known Georgians in a 3K program around, for sure.
Senator, my question is, I am trying to get a better understanding of how focusing on a small number of students that are achieving, and I applaud them for that, in private schools in 30314 is helping students that attend schools like M. Agnes Jones, also in my district, that is a great Atlanta Public Schools elementary school. How does taking those funds away from that school help those students that are still left behind in the public schools that are in this district?
Well, thank you, and I know it probably wasn't the senator's intent to say that we're helping some minority kids, so therefore this program must be good. The fact is the SOS program is different, unique, and not the same as this. So that we're talking about different things. And you are absolutely right. Taking money away, this program, this bill, is not a good idea and would negatively impact some of the students, if not most of the students in your zip code.
Thank you, Senator. And also, I'll just close with, I was sitting down here to make sure that I always lift up the most marginalized in our communities. And so that's why I'll be voting no on this bill, because I want to make sure that every student in my district has the opportunity to achieve, and not just those whose parents are able to take them out of their local public schools and enter them into some private schools. Thank you.
Thank you. And to follow up on her constituents' concerns, in the study in Cleveland, for instance, it showed that most of the parents, they didn't even have money for the transportation. They both worked. They couldn't get their kids to faraway private schools. They didn't have money for the transportations, other costs that might be associated. Most schools were not able to take advantage of the program, so it was detrimental to the majority.
Do you continue to yield?
I do.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 15th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield.
I yield.
Senator, I pose a question to you as it relates to the time that you've spent in the General Assembly as it relates to the Senate. Over the years, what do you see has been happening to the pressure that is put on public schools to perform, to do excellent things like we do in Muscogee County and some other areas? Can you give us an idea of what this kind of legislation and other similar types of legislation, what is this doing to the public education arena?
Well, it does quite a lot of things. As you know, over the last 40 years, education has changed a lot in Georgia. Schools are asked to do a lot more. When I was school, there was very few children that were on medication. There were actually much less programs for those with disabilities. Today, schools are asked to do more. They're asked to help people that need more help in many different ways. The burden of this program will be asking them to do all that and provide less. We'll be also having teachers worried more and more about their jobs as this program escalates. One projection that in 10 years, 90,000 kids may be in this program. Public educators have made this their life, will be worried about their future and how things are going for them. It will lessen the commitment for members of this body who have very affluent districts in the entire public school system and what we need for all the children of Georgia. But the primary thing is, as you say, the way it's written now, it will be an immediate loss each and every year from school districts to actually give more money for those going to private schools than the ones that stay back in public schools. And it will be a financial burden, which again, they will either have to come to property tax payers to raise their rate, or they will have to offer less students, less services. Classrooms will be more crowded than they already are. And as you know, from time we went to school many years ago, classes are already more crowded than they were back then.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 45th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the Minority Leader yield? I yield. Mr. Minority Leader, I know that the author of the bill got up and talked about a zip code 30314 in tragic circumstances with unbelievable statistics about crime. And I was just wondering, I know it's hypothetical, but what would you do to change that to make it any better? I mean, are you not appalled at those statistics like I am? Is that not true?
Absolutely. There's a lot of things that Senator from the 41st would do. One, I'd make sure that we had opportunity for the families to live around there. A lot of the problems they had was they didn't have good public education growing up, and they're not now able to provide for their families. A lot of problems that we have is over the last 30 years, we've seen the disparity in wages increase, so that lower income working people are making less and less than they were in purchasing power 40 years ago. So you have people who are doing the same job, construction workers that 40 years ago had a living wage for the family, now are actually living in poverty. And that poverty is causing more problems in the community. It means there are kids that don't have nice clothes and they're suffering, sometimes commit crime. Sometimes the adults commit crime. It means that people have less chance to buy books to read to their kids as they're growing up. Even in poor families 50 years ago, often one adult would stay home and foster and mentor the child. Now, in working families that have two families, and that's unfortunately, a much lower percentage than it was 50 years ago. Both members have to work. So there's a lot of things we can do to help. This bill is not one of them, Senator. I yield.
I don't think, am I turned on? There you go. Senator, wouldn't you like to give those mothers just one sliver of hope that if their child was in a failing school and they had the opportunity to transfer and to have a better life and that their future was much brighter than staying in that same zip code and another generation of poverty, why can't you give them just that one little opportunity? I don't understand.
Well, and that's unfortunate that you don't understand, Senator. The fact is that most of the families don't have the money to pay for the transportation cost. Some don't have the ability or time to go out and find these schools that may be private schools. They're not, quality schools are not even available in their communities. The fact is that when we look at all Georgia's children, we find that this will negatively impact a good many of those, especially those that you're referring to that need it most.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 42nd.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
I yield.
First question I have is, it looks like this fiscal note can go up to a cost to the state for these new ESAs of $271 million. Are you aware of that?
Yes, I saw the fiscal note. I, know also that the fiscal note is not attached directly to the bill that's before us. That's problematic. We talked earlier on engrossment that the bill, was, in my opinion, rushed through without as much debate as I would have liked. Without a fiscal note for the committee to consider was not appropriate as far as our Senate protocols. But that note says 271. I would think that it would cost more, but you're right. The fiscal note of 271 million, while we have outstanding the commitment of the governor to provide the balance of his commitment and pay raises, to get to first, to put another $270 million hit on the budget from this bill seems inappropriate and concerns me greatly.
It does seem like we could finish the teacher pay raise with that sort of money that we've been unable to do this year.
And I think that it definitely sends a message that those high-income folks that want to send their children to private school are going to benefit. Georgia teachers are not.
Will you yield for one to two more questions?
I yield.
It's my understanding that many of our rural school systems are more strapped for money than many of the ones that those of us from urban areas represent. Is that the case?
I believe it is, and in the past, this has been a concern from urban and rural Georgia of how we fund the best education for all of our students that we can, and I think it is a concern from our colleagues in rural Georgia.
So, and isn't it also the case, Senator, that there are not nearly, in fact, very few private school options throughout vast swaths of our state in rural Georgia?
That's absolutely correct, as well as even though there may be some schools in the metropolitan area, some people may not be accepted. They can be turned away, unlike a private school. And in some areas where there are schools, they don't have the capacity to help people.
Well, Senator, if our rural systems are strapped for cash and there aren't private school options around, I'm trying to understand how this bill furthers our goals of helping rural Georgia thrive.
Your question is, I'm sure, directed at each and every senator, and we'll have to hope that their constituency is to have, talk to them. I mean, but this is the reason why the Georgia School Superintendents Coalition, PAGE, and other groups around the state have opposed this bill.
Senator, are you aware that Washington, D.C. has one of, in fact, I think it is the only federally funded school voucher program?
I am aware it's one of the.
And are you aware that just 6 months ago, the U.S. Department of Education released results from that voucher program that unfortunately showed that students using the vouchers scored 10 points lower on math than their low-income peers who were remaining in public schools?
Well, I was not aware of that, Senator. I appreciate you informing me that information in the form of question. I do know that I have seen studies contrary to what the author presented, which showed very mixed results and what I would consider unfavorable results for many of those people going to private schools. I know one of the first voucher programs in the country, starting up in Milwaukee, had another detrimental effect where the private school failed and a lot of people went back in the public system after having taken money from that the state had sent in vouchers, then failed, and the state had to reabsorb those kids and pay extra money. So there was an extra cost to the state. All those things were not, I think, fully discussed and debated as this rushed through committee.
Well, Senator, I too have seen mixed results out of a lot of studies, both through universities, privately funded ones and publicly funded. But isn't it true that I would exhort all the members of this body to look at this particular study, because it is done by the U.S. Department of Education. This is the only federally funded voucher program in the country in Washington, D.C. It's out of the National Center for Education Assistance and Educational Evaluation and Regional Assistance, and it is called Evaluation of the D.C. Opportunity Scholarship Program, and unfortunately, the results are quite disheartening.
I would ask the senator to please, if it has not been placed on people's desks, to possibly sign and get that out, because that's something we would all like to look at.
Do you continue to yield?
I will.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 36th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield.
I yield.
Senator, thank you for your remarks, which I think are illuminating the grave consequences of this bill on our schools and our students across the state were it to become law. We have not heard much about the cost to administer this new fourth school system in Georgia, which is what this really would be constituting. Can you shed some light on those facts? They are contained. If people, the author was, I think, dismissive of the fiscal note. We, however, as a legislature, I believe, rely on the state auditor's office to provide good, sound information, qualify it with what they could and could not compute. The administrative costs are referenced in this, isn't it true?
Well, there are some costs that probably were reflective administrative in that consideration, but no, I don't think that there's much consideration to any costs with administration. And there's unforeseen cost as far as when students feel that they have been removed from a private school unnecessarily, and there's concerns of litigation where schools fail, as I stated, those kind of costs. Of course, there won't be a management program like a school, so even though the term, it's as big as the fourth largest school system, it won't have the system costs associated with a Gwinnett or Cobb or DeKalb County, so it won't have those kind of costs. But I do think there were factors, for instance, the state going out to make sure they're getting quality education, supervision, and checking upon our student population to make sure things are going well, that probably weren't adequately calculated. But it won't have the same administrative costs as a separate system.
Thank you for that response. And are you, like I and many of my colleagues, hearing from the people that educate our children in public schools about their concerns about this bill?
I've received a lot of calls, a lot of interest against this bill, and a lot of concerns. I've also had people who have called and said, I think it'll be a great idea. And then I sit down and I tell them, you may think it's a great idea, but look at this, look at that. And after we talk about it, they too have a concern that it may not be good for all the children in the system.
Thank you. Could you yield for one further question?
I will.
The study that you referred to in Cleveland, or the findings, could you share those again? What was the
Well, I have a lot of facts on Cleveland, but what I basically brought up to you was, I think it was Wisconsin. I mentioned the taxes. Cleveland, basically Cleveland, a study mentioned the obstacles of people who are low income to go to private schools. Even if this funding was in place, that most of the schools were somewhat higher and people had no additional monies than what they would have taken in the voucher. The quality education for those at that price was not acceptable. The cost of transportation, and some schools had uniforms and other costs that they could not bear. So basically in Cleveland, it was not accessed by low-income participants in any meaningful way.
So in fact, isn't it true that, and as we have drilled down into the language in this bill, that people of great means who are fully capable of funding their child's private school education are also included in this bill as families that can receive these public school dollars, our public tax dollars, and put it into account when they
It covers the
already have
entire
means?
spectrum. The answer to that would be yes. There are people who can afford private schools that would be included in this that get their money out of the school systems that might help others. There are people on the bubble that maybe couldn't really afford private school but could with this. But our charge is to look at all the students. And it's obvious that this program is not targeted at helping all the students or even the majority of students. And I have concerns about the bill for that reason.
Thank you.
Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 27th.
Mr. President, does the minority leader yield?
I yield.
That's a mouthful. Mr. Leader, isn't it true that the bill as it's written requires 3% of the funds received by the families to go directly towards covering administrative costs? In other words, of the dollar the family would get, 3 cents of that dollar would go towards covering the administrative costs. And isn't it further true that based on every estimate we've seen, that administrative cost that is captured within the program more than fully funds the admin costs of the program?
Well, that cost is not, I feel, taken to certain considerations as far as the state having to monitor more effectively private school systems, making sure that when there are problems in systems where students are somehow feeling they're wrong, making sure that we go in as a state to make sure that they are treated fairly and properly. I don't think it takes into effect all the costs that might be needed by the state to overview the system, but your basic statement of the 3% carve-out is correct.
Does the minority leader further yield?
I yield.
Isn't it true that the estimates actually show a multi-million-dollar surplus within the admin fees that could go to address the questions that you're raising?
Senator, if you wanted to make that a real issue, I think you would have had the consideration to get a physical note for us. The fact that you didn't want to get the auditor to bear down on real numbers and present this body with a physical note, I think is wrong.
Senator, the minority leader further yield?
I yield.
Mr. Leader, isn't it true that the numbers that we're discussing here were done by the state auditor?
Senator, you did not get a physical note for this bill, and I do not think the auditor properly addressed that last question that you phrased, and I think that a more complete report would have been more appropriate for this chamber.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you continue to yield?
How many more have we got?
2.
2 more. But I yield for 2 more, Mr.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 12th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield for a couple of questions? Thank you. Senator, is it not true that the real reason for SB 173 has not been properly debated in these chambers?
I believe that may be true.
And that this bill is about sameness. We want our children to go to school or with children that look like us, maybe play on the same ball clubs or go to the same churches.
I think that is a consideration that each and every member will have to look at. I think it's concern of the senator of 12th and the senator from the 41st.
Exactly. Do you think it's about the resegregation of educational institutions in the state of Georgia?
I think that we may see this model develop in a situation where we may very well have to face those type of questions in the court someday. And it is certainly, hopefully, an unintended consequence of this bill, but I think it is most likely will be a consequence of this type of legislation.
Senator, is it also not true that there is a calculated effort, or appears to be a calculated effort, to totally dismantle public education to the detriment of those that we serve every day, whether they are black, white, brown, or whatever in the state of Georgia?
That is a deep concern for myself, and I think it should be a deep concern for millions of parents in Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 38th for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
I yield.
Is it not true that I have worked out of a facility or have been in a facility that is within a mile of these wonderful bright futures that we keep talking about since the 60s?
That is correct, Senator.
Is it not true that I have visited the school when it was a public school, Herndon Elementary School? Yes, ma'am. And participated in science fairs and other types of fairs that the school had?
The senator has been very active in many programs in the school, and I believe that to be correct.
Is it not further true that Herndon Elementary School under Atlanta public school system was one of the brightest and best schools in the Atlanta public school system?
I am confident the senator knows of which she speaks.
And as it became a KIPP Academy and now a Bright Futures, they have not maintained the same standard that was maintained when it was a public school.
I am confident the senator knows of what she speaks.
And I'm going to further make one other comment. I am not sure why this body thinks that Bright Futures is doing so well. They have nothing to prove. Is it not true that they are doing such an excellent job of educating, as they want to say, the disadvantaged students, children in the area and the surrounding areas?
I have confidence that the senator wishes to do the very best for her constituents and the children in her district.
Thank you. Oh, that's not my district, by the way.
Oh.
Thank you.
I yield the well if there's no further questions.
You have an additional question. He yields to well, or your time has expired. Thank you. Chair recognizes the senator from the 56th to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is an emotional issue. As senators, it's our jobs to separate that emotion from all of the facts. There are people here today that adamantly support our public schools, and I am one of them, and I commend you. There are people that support the parent and student's right of choice. I'm also one of those, and I commend you. There are also those in this room that are both, and you're not necessarily one nor the other. I think we've learned that one size does not fit all. In fact, other states have chosen different paths, such as Florida, and they leaped past us. And we're still trying to catch up in many ways. I attended public schools. Both my boys attended public schools. But the impact of public schools has been studied time and time again. In fact, in 21 studies, 20 of them came back favorable to public schools in this type of a scenario, and one came back as neutral. None were against. In my 9 years serving in this body, I have watched this debate happen numerous times, as many of you have. And typically, everyone goes to their corners and we talk about the potential what-ifs and how this will cause some type of a great confluence and disaster. But it never does. It never does. I'm always going to choose the student and the parent first. That's why we have schools, folks, for the students, so we can educate them. And not every instance works for that student in that school. The very foundation of our nation comes from freedom and liberty. Why doesn't that same freedom apply to education? I can't imagine our founding fathers would stand here today and say, I hope we created a more perfect union that would base on your postal zip code to where your kid's going to go to school and not give them the very freedom and option to do what you think is best for their livelihoods and their education. They would not. I've heard the words being used, taking state funds. The state has no money. They have the people's money, of which they forcibly take from them through taxes. So the same people's money who may want to have a different option for their child, that they're already paying to utilize some of those dollars in order to give them a better education, I would hope we would never stand in front of the student and the people that fund that. This has been a good debate. I know a lot of questions have been asked, and I'm not going to continue to debate any further, Mr. President, but I hope when the time comes to vote that you'll think about the student first, and I yield the will.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 10th.
Thank you, Mr. President, and members of this body. I disagree with the senator from the 56 when he stated emphatically that this was about an emotional issue. I suggest to all of us in this chamber that this is an issue about dollars and cents. It's an issue where we are being held responsible for being stewards of the state's resources, those tax dollars that's been entrusted to our care. And the senator from the 27th, time expired in the well before I had an opportunity to ask him about what I perceive as some obvious flaws in this bill, and I hope after this debate that you will agree with me as well. I direct your attention to lines 130, 131, and 132 of this bill. It specifically states on line 131 that a school must demonstrate their fiscal soundness. And I was captured by that meaning of fiscal soundness because anytime I see something related to dollars and cents and the trust that we've been given in this body, my eyes are instantly attracted to it. But let me just tell you what it says in here about fiscal soundness. It says a school can have an operation for one school year and be fiscally sound. I don't know of any business, any institution, anywhere that would consider themselves fiscally sound after being in business or being open in this particular case for 1 year. But that doesn't end the discussion. It also says that a school can be fiscally sound simply by submitting a financial information report. And I draw the senators from the 27 his attention to that or between school year or by submitting a financial report. It doesn't even say an audited financial report. Someone in here should be concerned about giving state tax dollars, citizens' tax dollars to an institution potentially that could be open for 1 year, or as it states here on line 132, simply by submitting a financial report. But it doesn't end there. As they say in the hood where I'm from, it gets gooder and gooder. I direct your attention to line 133 through 139 of this particular document. And it says over on line 134 that the report must confirm that the school designed to participate is insured. I would hope that we all agree that insurance is not enough. I would hope we agree that these institutions not only need to be insured, but they need to be bonded, they need to have workers' comp, and they need to have all of the other prerequisites required to be in business. And it goes on to say on line 35 that the owner or owners shall have sufficient capital. Now, there's no definition in here for what sufficient capital is. I can only glean from what's in this bill what they are referring to as potentially sufficient capital. So let me continue. As I said, it gets gooder and gooder. It goes on to say on that same line, or they can have the credit to operate the school for the upcoming school year. So you put those two conjunctive together, and the only conclusion you can come up with is this bill simply says that in order to be eligible for these funds, you only have to be able to show that you have sufficient capital to operate for one upcoming school year. I don't know if that's based on an enrollment of 10 students or what they expect their enrollment to be. But it goes on to say, because of that or on line 135, that they don't even need good credit to operate. So what this statement says to me is that you can have some money in the bank, but you can be a lousy payer of your bills and still operate one of these schools. I would suggest to the senator from the 29th that you don't need that quote or in there. It should be both. If you're going to be responsible for tax dollars, not only should you have the sufficient capital, but you certainly should have good credit as well. But that isn't the end of the story. Down on line 137 and 138, it talks further about this report. And here's the catch-all that should trouble all of us. It said simply starting on line 137 that the report shall be limited in scope. So let me remind all of those that are present today what we're being asked to vote on today in this particular bill. First of all, we're being asked to vote on the bill where those that are eligible for these funds can only be open for a year. They don't really need to have any kind of financial accounting. They can simply submit a report and be eligible for these funds. So, seriously, folks, 1 year or submitting a financial report and you're eligible for tax dollars? I don't know of any other institution in this state where we've made institutions like this eligible to receive tax dollars. And then we say, you don't need to be of good credit to even operate it. All you have to do is have some money in the bank to operate for one school year and expect that the revenues you're going to receive from this fund is going to continue to allow you to operate for years and years after that. And oh, by the way, this report that we plan to submit and the information we plan to get from you, that in itself is going to be limited in scope. I would suggest to you that this financial soundness that's spelled out in this report is irresponsible. It is sufficiently lacking. And certainly, what I see here doesn't even qualify that financial soundness test that we all expect good institutions to have. Now, had this bill not been engrossed, we all would have had an opportunity to perfect this legislation. As a matter of fact, I had prepared the changes that I just suggested with you for this particular bill, what would have been an amendment number 1, 2, 3, I don't know, but it certainly would be an amendment to this bill. But since this bill has been engrossed, the only thing that I can do is submit my amendment to the senator from the 27th and pray that he consider these changes that I recommended up here since in his word, he's making people eligible for tax dollars with very little consideration for true fiscal and financial soundness. And if there aren't any questions, Mr. President, I'll yield the well.
You have no questions.
Thank you. I yield.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 45th to speak to the measure.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I think everybody already knows how they're going to vote. But I'd like to just add a little historical perspective to this particular bill. And I rise in support of Senate Bill 173, just as I did 11 years ago. And 11 years ago, we heard this same doom and gloom and this same interjection of fear, and that the sky is falling. Chicken Little, the sky is falling. But guess what? We voted, we had these exact same arguments 11 years ago. And I want to tell you that was in the 2007 and the 2008 session. And this fear, I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's like deja vu. Here we are a decade later and we're talking about the same subject matter. But the difference is, this was former Governor Sonny Perdue who had the special needs voucher. But let me tell you what's remarkable about today. Out here in the hall, there's mothers that are lobbying in favor of this bill. And some of them have taken advantage of the special needs voucher. But guess what? Some of them have success stories. I met a mother out here. I know the author's been very busy, and he's been working his votes and everything. But I met a mother out there about an hour ago. She's a foster care mother. She's fixing to adopt some more kids. And unfortunately, foster care kids are the ones that this is tailored for the most. And that's what I was questioning the minority leader about. When you know you have targeted zip codes that have the highest incidence of criminal activity, and we sit here and we ignore our fiduciary responsibility to do something about it, why don't we have every tool in the toolbox? Why don't we have creativity and think of other ways to be able to help people? Are we supposed to be stymied because of fear? The same fear that was in this room 11 years ago? My answer is no. I want everybody to have equal opportunity. I want to talk about, there was 5 senators in here that are still here that voted 11 years ago. The senator from Athens, the senator from West Georgia, the senator from Chickamauga, myself, and I think there was one more, whatever. There was 5. The reason, 4 including myself. I'm an urban senator. The reason I bring this up, it was across the whole state. It was nothing about this urban and rural divide and what are you going to do about the rural areas. And let me tell you about the rural areas. Yeah, they may not have the brick and mortar school in their county or in their region, but guess what we have from the last 11 years ago? We have cyber academies. My school system, if you're not in school during a storm, you're at home working on your tablet at home. That's a good thing. Why should we stymie creativity? And also, why should we succumb to this fear and this Chicken Little theory that the place is going to fall apart? I'm a product of the Gwinnett County school system. I graduated from Burtmore High School. Do you think I would sit back there at my desk and push a green button if I thought that I was going to hurt 180,000 kids in the school system, one of the best school systems in the United States. Do you think for one moment, one iota of a moment, that I would put those kids in danger? You already know how I feel about the City of Beaufort school system. Some people call it the University of Beaufort school system. I am a Beaufort Wolf. Do you think that I would sit back there and harm those kids? The answer is absolutely not. That this fear and gloom and doom is not in reality. Currently, we have approximately 15% of kids with IEPs. Approximately 4,500 kids opt out and take advantage of that special needs program, and that's the mothers that I'm talking about back there. How can we reform the DFACS system, which we're in the process of doing, if you don't give these guardians, if you don't give these parents, if you don't give these single moms the opportunity to have that brighter future that I was talking about a little while ago? The last thing I want to talk about, well, there's two last things I want to talk about. Everybody's deriding these private schools. I'm proud of the private schools. I have religious, faith-based private schools in my county, and I have, like, my kids went to a non-faith-based school. I'm proud of these organizations. I go and I visit them just like I do the public schools. They're an integral part of our community. The moms go across the street to McDonald's. They go down the street and buy school supplies. They are a vital part, and I'm tired of people coming up here and deriding them and talking about how awful they are. I'm proud of them. I'm proud of the homeschoolers I have. I can't tell you how much time I spend with the homeschoolers. I go to their graduation ceremonies. I'm proud of the homeschoolers. God bless them. Not everybody is the same. Not everybody is a cookie cutter. I raised a child that wasn't a cookie cutter, that had that IEP. Not everybody, but everybody does deserve opportunity in the school system. And that's what that bill aims to do. I want to talk just a little bit about some pages that I pulled from 11 years ago. The senator from Atlanta was in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution in February 1st, 2007. She said in a statement after the vote, the bill could reverse 30 years of progress of educating students with special needs in regular education settings in their neighborhood schools. And even though she said that 11 years ago, the senator sitting right here from the 6th said, well, it's okay with those special needs vouchers now. They're pretty good. They worked out pretty good. Well, the question is, if they worked out pretty good, how do you know that this is not going to work out pretty good? And then I want to state from our very famous senator that ran for mayor of Atlanta, Senator Vincent Fort, and I can say his name because he's now a former senator, and he said on February 1st, 2007, this legislation will siphon off needed dollars from our local school systems. That was another senator. This is the gateway to vouchers and the dismantling of our public school system. This is the gateway to vouchers and the dismantling of our public school system. Senator Vincent Fort. Now, I ask you, in 11 years, has our school systems fallen apart? No. As a matter of fact, my school system, I believe, got twice the Broad Award. It is one of the most famous awards in the United States. It's still functioning, it's still there, and it's going to be there. I appreciate the discussion on this. I think everyone knows how they're going to vote. I encourage everyone to vote and give these kids an opportunity to succeed, just like every child in the state of Georgia should have. Senate Bill 173. Thank you very much, and I yield the well.
For what purpose does the senator from the 51st rise?
Mr. President, I move to resolve debate.
Senator from the 51st has moved that we resolve debate. Is there objection? There is objection. It's a non-debatable motion, and we will count hands. Will you rise, stand, and be counted? Those in favor of the motion? Yeas and nays. The yeas will stand, rise, and be counted. You move for the machine vote? Let's put it on the machine. Those in favor of the motion signify by voting the yay button. Those opposed vote no. Nay. Secretary will unlock the machine. All right, the motion to resolve debate has carried. The yeas are 30, the nays are 23. Here's how this is going to work. We'll have 3 senators have 5 minutes to speak to the measure. The senators from the 34th, the 6th, and the 2nd will then recognize the minority report for 10 minutes, and we'll recognize the author for 10 minutes to close debate. Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 34th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand before you as a former school board member, and the senator from the 45th took us back a few years, and I want to take us back even further. This happened to be my life story, and it has a newspaper article from Clayton News Daily back from 1998. And guess what it's talking about? Vouchers. Now, I've heard a lot of debate today saying it's not a voucher. But anytime you're taking public dollars and the entity can tell a child no, it becomes a problem. When every child can't go to the school, it becomes a problem. To deny a child access to public education, in a lot of these private entities, we're sending public dollars, but all the public kids cannot go. I stand before you to let you know, and to my constituents, because I've heard from both Clayton County and Fayette County, which are the 2 counties I represent, with opposing views on this particular bill. But I was against voucher then, and I stand before you today to say I am against vouchers today. Regardless of whether we call it a voucher, it doesn't matter to me, because I know it comes down to dollars and cents. My school board member down in Fayette told me, please do not support that bill. I actually got a text from one of my Clayton County constituents asking me to support the bill. But let me tell you what I'm dealing with. Vouchers do not improve students' academic performance. Vouchers divert public money to unaccountable private schools. Vouchers do not improve opportunity for children from lower income families. Vouchers do not save taxpayers money. Vouchers do not increase education choice, because every parent may want to choose whatever they want to choose, but every parent don't have that exact right. I submit to you that in our family, here in the city of Atlanta, the senator from the 38th mentioned my elementary school, which is a public school in Atlanta. We did not even consider any other option, namely because of means. And the other side, when means are an issue, they come to the legislators and ask for a change in the law. And we have seen a lot of movement where vouchers are concerned. But I will tell you that when my family made the decision to put one of my kids, grandkids, into a private school, we all met and decided it was worth it because we saw the need in going into a private entity. We were not for taking the public dollars and putting it into the private sector where you can tell a child, no, you cannot be admitted. There's a real problem going on today when we start trying to disguise what we are doing in this body. But in this body, it was a voucher in '98. It's still a voucher in 2019. And since my light has come on and I was given the time limit, I'm going to go ahead and yield the well. But I will say the majority of the folk in Fayette left Clayton, and it wasn't about anything other than means. Those that had means moved, and those that didn't stayed. And unfortunately, that's what happened too often in our public school setting. But now you want to say, here's a voucher, take it, and you can disguise it under all pretenses, but it's still a voucher. Thank you. I yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. The chair recognizes the senator from the 6th for 5 minutes to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I was told yesterday that I should be careful about this bill, that this issue polls well in my district, and probably because I have some of the best private schools in this state, and I have to tell you, I'm very proud of them. They are excellent private schools. And this whole idea that this bill is about freedom and liberty and giving people the ability to choose, people have the choice. People can send their kids wherever they want to send them. But at the end of the day, then they have to pay for it. They have to pay for it. I have made that choice. My son has been in private school his entire life, and I have paid for it. My daughter's in public school, excellent public schools. Each of us has to make a determination with respect to our children, one way or the other, but at the end of the day, it should not be about public funds. We have a constitutional imperative, y'all, to provide an adequate public education to the children of the state. It is in our Constitution, and somehow we get lost in that. This whole idea of freedom and liberty and choice and let the money follow the child, that's not what this is about. Public money should not be going to private schools that are unaccountable, that don't have to take all comers. And private schools, they can discriminate. They absolutely can. So the whole idea that they're going to throw open their doors and give kids all these opportunities is just not true. We know that. No matter how you dress this up, we know the reality of this bill. Now, this is what we know, because I like to talk about facts and not necessarily emotion all the time. At 8:56 a.m., we get an email from the senator from the 27th, and all of a sudden we have a fiscal note. The fiscal note associated with the House bill. He says it covers the same ground. Well, funny, because in the committee he said it was revenue neutral and a fiscal note wasn't even required. So then we come in and we have it on our desk. And this is what we know. What we know is that this bill will eventually cost the state $543 million. That ain't neutral. And even apart from that, you want to talk about your local school systems that you've been getting calls from? Because I know they've been lighting you up. It's going to cost them $442 million, a loss of revenue to the local school systems. And guess what that means? We lose that money coming in locally, taxes go up. So y'all think about that, right? That when you vote for this bill, you're basically not only taking public funds from your local school systems, but you are going to ensure that taxes are going to go up for the homeowners that live in your district. This ain't about freedom and liberty. We have freedom and liberty. This is about taking public money and funneling it to private institutions that are unaccountable. Y'all need to think about that. Search your hearts, search your minds. Think about your constitutional duty to the children of this state and to the people who elected you to be here, because at the end of the day, you're going to have to go home and you're going to have to answer their questions. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 2nd for 5 minutes to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to Senate Bill 173. But let me tell you why. I support public education. I think public education is good for Georgia. But I also support school choice. I live in Chatham County, where Chatham County has one of the highest ratio of school options. We have public education, we have private schools, we have public charters, we have virtual schools. And like many of you, we also have homeschools. And it works. But we, as a state, cannot continue to support or continue to help our public schools if we continue to pull money out of it. Why not take this money that we're talking about taking out of public education and put it to enhance neighborhood schools? Parents in poor neighborhoods won't be able to afford private schools, not even with a voucher. Parents in poor neighborhoods cannot afford vouchers because they still have to get their kids to school. Most private schools probably don't offer transportation. So how can a poor family without transportation, without transportation, take their kid to a school? There's also food costs, book costs, and all these other costs that's associated with private education. So this is not helping inner city students. This is not helping poor students. What this is helping the same old, same old. I was contacted by the president of the Georgia Association of Educators. They are in opposition to this measure. I was contacted by the superintendent of my local school district. They are in opposition to this measure. We already passed 2 voucher programs, and we've seen what it happens when you take money out of public schools, and you know it does not happen. And we talked about oversight, and the senator from the 10th talked about oversight, so we're not going to talk about that, and he also talked about the funding for the 1 year. And we know what happens when you just look at a school and you say the only reason they can qualify for just being funded for 1 year. So what happens 10 years down the road? We need to think about our children. We need to think about that GOSA does not have the capabilities of monitoring public schools or monitoring these private schools or monitoring these voucher programs. They don't have the physical capabilities. We know that in Arizona, there's rampant waste in voucher programs. Do we want to be like Arizona? Do we want waste and fraud with our public dollars to happen here in Georgia? And the answer is no. I urge my friends to vote against Senate Bill 173. I want us to work for a better Georgia where all young people have opportunities for an affordable education, a free education, but more importantly, let's have an education, a public education, where our kids can have funding so they can do the necessary projects they need to do. Because public school systems still have to pay for the bus services. If they fund it for 50 kids, and they still have to pay for the brick and mortar of existing schools. Let's support public education. Let's vote down this measure, and let's move Georgia forward. Thank you.
Chair would like to now recognize the senator from the 36th to speak to the minority report for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I took an opportunity on Friday to begin addressing the concerns I have around Senate Bill 173, and many of them have been highlighted again today and pointed out again today. But I will take advantage of the fact that we filed a minority report in order to share with you the very, very deep concerns that we have about Senate Bill 173. I'll first point to the fact that this bill, virtually a mirror image, is in Ways and Means over there in the vaunted Ways and Means Committee of the Georgia House of Representatives. They've not moved that bill out of Ways and Means. They did have the good sense to request a fiscal note, and you have it on your desk today. We asked the author in Finance Committee for a fiscal note, and we're told, oh, that's not required, that's not necessary, this is revenue neutral. Well, the fiscal note that you have before you indicates it's not revenue neutral. It's a bill that takes public dollars and funnels public money that should be in our public school systems, meeting the needs of their strapped budgets, and it funnels that money to private institutions. And the accountability factors are really, frankly, laughable. To expect that we're going to set up and fund a whole structure to accept these applications, to review them, to pick and choose, to award these monies to families, applicants, and then monitor where that money goes and what happens to that money when it's a very expansive definition of what they can spend their money on, including taking our public school K through 12 dollars and putting it on higher education, for the Lord's sake, just to further complicate this very radical bill. The bill was introduced over here, I believe it was the 25th, first read on the 25th here in the Senate of February, and days later, a meeting was called for 8 o'clock in the morning of Finance Subcommittee. And do you understand me? Now, I want you to hear this. 2 senators attended that meeting, the chair and 1 committee member. And that's the only senators in this body that had an opportunity to hear from the people that brought concerns about this bill. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe our Republican members of this Senate have only heard from the author in their closed caucus meetings about this bill. Now, I'm sure that they're hearing from their folks back home because people are highly concerned. Let's think about that. A bill of these implications and this impact got heard at an 8 a.m. subcommittee meeting by 2 senators. 54 of us weren't there. 2 senators were there. A few hours later, it comes up to the Finance Committee. Same day. What kind of due diligence can you do on a bill of this size in that amount of time? And our entire Finance Committee was rushed through a meeting that had no opportunity to hear from anybody, except there was a guy sitting by the author with a name of an entity that I'd never heard of who said it was just great for all over the country, and that was allowed, that testimony was allowed. But all of those people who labor in the vineyard of public education at all levels, who've committed their lives, pursued an education, earned the degrees, labored in the vineyard of public education on behalf of all of our students, were their voices there at that Finance Committee? Did we hear from our school board? No, none of that was allowed because it was said that all the testimony had been taken that morning. Now, I don't know if the Republican caucus invited in some people to testify. I highly doubt it. I don't think you had an opportunity to hear from the experts on this bill. And you just barely got a chance to even know that there was a fiscal note on the other side. I say to you, don't be stampeded into voting for radical legislation introduced a couple of weeks ago over here by, as you heard from the senator from the 27th, someone who has not yet served a full term, has not served a full session, has been in our ranks for this heady, exhilarating session that we've been riding through in the last 2 months. And this radical remake that flies in the face of all the assembled knowledge of people working in public education. We're supposed to, you're being asked to vote on this, fall on your sword and vote on this, and go home and try to explain this. And particularly the people from rural areas that have a paucity of private schools are laboring under a lack of funding for education. And you're going to go home and tell your constituents and your educators, folks that serve on your school boards, that this is justifiable and a good plan? It's hard to imagine how you can do that with a straight face. It's radical legislation. Is this the type of thing that you study for a year, where you really have ample time, go around the state, hear the input from people all across the state, from parents, from educators, from students, from your business community, from your faith community? Isn't that what you do seriously with a bill of this nature? It's not been what we've been doing here in the Senate for the last few days in this rush to a vote today. The author talked about gloom and doom and hearing all this gloom and doom, and what are we talking all this gloom and doom, and oh, there was gloom and doom whenever we introduced considered a voucher bill. I'll tell you a little bit about the gloom and the doom in Georgia around public education, and most of you in here have lived through every minute of it, and you know it yourselves. And that is that when Sonny Perdue became governor, he instituted an austerity cut to public education in his very first budget. And that austerity cut continued, and there are people here who were sitting on your local school board back then. That continued every year. And by the time the clock rolled around and the dollars rolled away from public education, and folks, this is fact, not fiction, this legislature and the administration, the last two administrations, had cut $9 billion cumulatively from our public school system in Georgia. Dispute that number if you can. It is a matter of public record. And the school systems, I would talk to them. They would come down here, and they'd say, this amounted to $60 million out of our budget for Fulton County over the last 2 years. We heard the numbers from the people who are in charge of balancing these school budgets and educating our kids with public dollars. That's what I call gloom and doom. Were you around when teachers were furloughed across our great state? Were you here when teachers, people who had given their lives to children and who earn a little paltry paycheck and meet their bills and go back to school the next day and take $1,000 or $2,000 out of their own pocketbooks to mount the bulletin boards and get the extra teaching aids for the classroom? Were you here when they were furloughed? You're going to go back to those furloughed teachers that actually took a hit out of their paycheck and tell them that this bill is just going to be fine. We're not going to hurt your school system one little bit. What about those paraprofessionals that were laid off? What about all those arts classes, extracurricular classes, language classes? Things were cut out of our curriculums. What about the schools that could not have their school doors open for 180 days of instruction? That's gloom and doom, good people. That's gloom and doom. It was embarrassing to think that this state, with the size of our budget, was subjecting our education system to that. We had schools running 4 days a week. I'd love to ask for a show of hands. Was it in your school system? More than likely, most likely, all those systems were rural systems, struggling, have a low tax base, losing jobs, and education is paying the price. And then, on top of that we went for years, we get a first time we fully funded QBE in a dozen years, if not more, when we'd cut $9 billion cumulatively from our public schools. We then, in the last year of Governor Deal's 8 years, the budget paid the full QBE. And then we had a promise that the teachers were going to get a raise. Well, I remember back when people running this state did a lot for education. Zell Miller gave 6% increases to teachers 4 years in a row to get our teachers up to national level. And that made a difference. That made a difference. In
The
this
senator's
current
time has
climate,
expired.
Did I have 10 minutes?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. In this current climate, we've lost 15,000 teachers over these last several years. That 10 minutes raced on by. Look into your hearts and see what you're going to do for the children and families and teachers and educators and your community back home, and serve all the people, not a little concocted thing that's going to put money in the pockets of the well-to-do to augment their private school tuition. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the author of the bill, the senator from the 27th, to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. It seems I grossly miscalculated my first bill. I thought this was going to be an easy one. And this was a unique form of hazing. So I appreciate y'all taking it easy on me. But if this is what we had to do to get through the traditional hazing, well, I appreciate that. Look, we've got two different worldviews before us today. It's as simple as that. And there's a lot of bipartisan work that we do in this chamber. And then there's some moments where you begin to see differences in ideology and differences in worldview. And today is one of those days. We're going to have a lot of votes coming after this, so I'll move through my closing remarks quickly. But to those who vote opposite or spoke against this bill, you're still my friend. We just see this differently, and that's what makes this country so great. The reality is, every time we have explored some sort of school choice bill in this chamber, we have heard predictions of resegregation. We have heard predictions of, as the senator from Atlanta mentioned, doom and gloom. In fact, there were two senators in this chamber who are still here today, who were here 10 years ago, both of whom spoke today, who predicted with our 2007 school choice program for special needs students, which has been lauded already by the minority party, it was going to dismantle public education. That was a quote that was in the newspaper. It was going to cipher off needed dollars from our local school systems. This is the gateway to vouchers and, again, the dismantling of our school system. This bill could reverse 30 years of progress of encouraging, educating students with special needs in regular settings. Doom and gloom. That's one side of the worldview of what this could be. Your other option for worldview is some of the stories that we already shared this morning. Stories of children and parents who would be here today, if they could, to tell you that the bill that we passed in 2007 changed the educational lives of their students. And that the predictions of setting us back 30 years were nothing other than alarmist guesswork. Because what has happened since then? Since then, we have increased per pupil spending in the state of Georgia by 43%. If that is the dismantling of a system, I would like to see what it looks like to build a system. As you all know, we have fully funded QBE for the first time ever. We have passed a historic pay raise. And in the last 2 years alone, while the enrollment in the state of Georgia has declined, I'm going to repeat that, while enrollment in the state of Georgia has declined, we have increased spending by $1.35 billion. This is not a bill that is designed to hurt public education. The senator from the 6th mentioned how this issue polls. This is not a Republican-Democrat issue. You might find that surprising. I actually found that surprising. A nationwide poll that was taken in January of this year shows the following support for education savings account across the following demographics and ideologies. Republicans support it by 81%. Democrats support it with 70%. Independents support it with 78%. Hispanics support it with 87%. African Americans support it with 73%. Millennials support it with 77%. And Generation X supports it with 80%. I mentioned we do a lot of things that are bipartisan. I would submit to you that this, in reality, in the minds of your constituents, is bipartisan. Finally, I mentioned the studies done by Jeffrey Forster, because you've heard a lot of conjecture today. You've heard a lot about what if this could happen and that could happen, and what if. Well, the good news is we know the answers to the what ifs, because we have a number of states that have implemented similar programs. And then we have people that have studied those programs. And across those programs, the vast majority of them, over 80%, found that bills such as this have positive impacts on academic outcome of the choice participants and the students who remain in public schools. 31 studies out of 33 studies showed this improved the experience for those who remain in public schools. We heard some doom and gloom about resegregation and the racial composition of our schools. Where this has happened, 9 studies have shown it has a positive impact on the racial makeup of our schools, and 1 neutral impact with 0 negative impacts. The effective choice programs on your students' civic values, 8 positive, 3 neutral. And finally, the impact on taxpayers and their districts, 23 positive, 3 neutral. So we can listen to what we politicians think might happen, or we can look at what's actually happened. Finally, we have a study of every one of your districts in the state of Georgia. In 159 out of 159 districts, there is a financial benefit, since we are only giving the students and their families the state funding, but the local funding stays and the federal funding stays. The marginal cost of educating that student who leaves the system is higher than the state funding. So we can listen to the politicians in this room apply their guesswork, or we can listen to a UGA professor who dove into the budgets of every single school district in this state and found the same thing, which is universally true. The reality is, if you want to help the bottom line financially of your school districts, you'll pass this bill. But ultimately, this is a bigger issue than just dollars and cents. This is ultimately an issue about people, and really ultimately this is an issue about families and their children. And we have a mom here today. Gina McCarran is with us in the gallery. And Gina lives in Peachtree Corners with her 3 biological children and her two children that are becoming part of her family via foster care. Gina, you can stand up. You can show the good folks your face. Her youngest son, Joshua, joined them from foster care in the 2nd grade. He was a transient student starting kindergarten, and he missed out on a lot of the early intervention opportunity. When they welcomed him into their family a year ago, it was immediately clear that he was far behind academically. They started tutoring, and the private academic evaluation revealed that Joshua struggled with dyslexia, a writing disorder, auditory processing delays, language delays, inattention, and significant trauma due to the neglect and the abuse. While he was flagged in the 1st grade, the frequent moves and transition left him inconsistent interventions with no parental advocate for him. So today, Gina is having to make up for lost time with private tutoring, therapy 5 days a week, weekly counseling, and Joshua is under the care of a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and a counselor. The local school has been responsive to Joshua's needs, but after a year, Joshua has made no progress. Gina and her family believe that Joshua needs to be in a school that specializes in helping students with dyslexia and the language processing disorders that Joshua struggles with every day. An education savings account would give Joshua, Gina, and the rest of their family the opportunity to attend a school specialized to meet his needs and to fund the academic support that he needs to prosper. First of all, Gina, I would like to thank you for participating in the foster care program and bringing Joshua into your family. But I'd like to challenge the members of this chamber. We can repeat the belief and the doom and gloom that we hear every time this issue comes up, that time and time again has been proven false. Or we can turn our gaze to the students, and we can focus on providing students and families, 1/2 of 1% of our entire student population the first year, the opportunity to make those choices for themselves. I ask for your favorable support of this bill, and I yield the will. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. That ends debate. For what purpose does the senator from the 21st rise?
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to be excused from voting on Senate Bill 173 pursuant to Senate Rule 5-1.8D.
Is there objection? Hearing none, unanimous consent to be excused from the vote pursuant to the rule. The question is now on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection to adoption of the committee substitute? Hearing none, the committee substitute is adopted. The question is on the passage of the bill by substitute. All those in favor of the bill will vote yea, opposed nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 25, the nays are 28. This bill not having received the requisite constitutional majority is therefore not passed. For what purpose does the senator from the 45th rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move, at the proper time, I move for reconsideration of this particular vote.
Proper time would be tomorrow. Thank you, Senator. Notice has been served to the secretary. We have some special guests with us here today that we would like to recognize. I'd like to call upon our good friend, the senator from the 15th, to introduce our special guests today.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for giving me this very short period of time to introduce some very good friends of mine from Columbus, Georgia. If the senator from the 29th will join me up here too, I can have us out and at lunch perhaps as soon as we can get here. This is Columbus Day, and we invite you, first of all, to come around this afternoon at 4 o'clock at the depot to enjoy some good food and fellowship and things like that. As they come to the stage, let me introduce the people up here with me is Mayor Skip Henderson. Mayor Henderson, hold up your hand. Thank you. Commanding General Gary Brito, right here. Jason Cuevas, Chamber Board Chairman and Georgia Power Vice President, right here with me. Brian Anderson, Chamber President and CEO. Brian back there. Command Sergeant Major Martin Celestine. And my city manager, right here, Isaiah Hugler, right here. And I'm also joined by the senator from the 29th. So we would like to have them come up today and say a few words about how they're enjoying watching us make sausage or otherwise pass laws. And at this time, if I could, I would like to have the mayor come up and make a few comments along with a couple of other men. Mayor Henderson.
Thank you. First of all, let me say thank you so much for allowing Columbus, Georgia to join you in your chambers. We are very appreciative of what y'all do every day. We pledge to be a part of it. If you need us, you call us. We particularly appreciate the hard work you put into moving this state forward, because we believe that what's good for Georgia is good for Columbus. We also believe what's good for Columbus is good for Georgia. And to that end, I want to make sure I recognize and thank our senators for the hard work that they do in serving the state by serving the residents of our region. We invite you to come visit us in Columbus, Georgia. We think you'll find a community that is very aggressive with its business environment. We also are working very hard to try to serve all the citizens of our community by lowering the poverty level. We also have a lot for you to do. Anything from whitewater rafting to riding a zip line, even into another state. So we thank you so much for what you do. God bless you, and God bless Georgia. Thank you.
And if I may, Mr. President, and can we have a few words from the commander of Fort Benning, General Brito?
Hey, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you today. On behalf of the 14,000 soldiers, their families, and the leaders at Fort Benning, Georgia, thank you very much for your overwhelming and untiring support to the United States military, and more importantly for us, of course, the United States Army. We are extremely proud and humbled to be one of the many military installations in the state of Georgia, and equally as proud in that we just recently crossed our centennial, 100 years ago when Camp Benning started, largely due to the vision and the support of the city of Columbus and the great state of Georgia. And we look very much forward to training your Army, training our Army, and building the future for us over the next 100 years. The doors at Fort Benning, the Maneuver Center of Excellence, are open to anybody who'd like to come down and visit, and I welcome an opportunity to work with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. Don't forget it's Columbus Day, so we're having a lot of fun, and enjoy your gifts on your desk. Let's give them a round of applause one more time. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, will you read the caption on Senate Bill 95?
Senate Bill 95 by Senator Robertson of the 29th and others. A bill will be titled enactment Title 36 of the OCGA relating to local government so as to change the terms for contracts for utility services and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Regulated Industries and Utilities offers the following substitute to Senate Bill 95. A bill will be titled enactment Title 36 of the OCGA relating to local government so as to change the terms for contracts for certain utility services and for other purposes. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 29th to speak to Senate Bill 95.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, I rise today to seek your support on Senate Bill 95. What Senate Bill 95 will do is it will allow local municipalities, or as we know them, MEACs and electric cities, to go in to sign contracts that are currently limited to 10 years to 20 years. Many Fortune 500 companies are moving to renewable energy, and they're looking for states that are friendly and acceptable to such technology. What this bill will do will allow developers to come into communities to develop solar fields, sell that energy to MEACs. The MEACs will then in turn be selling the energy to the electric cities, and the electric cities will be able to enter into contracts with companies like IKEA, Johnson & Johnson, Walmart, and others. I seek your support on this. It's going to build a lot of jobs in my district and in districts throughout the community from LaGrange to Albany and beyond. If there are not any questions, Mr. President, I yield the well.
You have no questions, Senator. The question is on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection to adoption of the committee substitute? Hearing none, the committee substitute is adopted. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none, and the report of the committee is agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Are there any objections? The chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. Shall this bill now pass by substitute? The question is on the passage of the bill by substitute. All those in favor of the bill will vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 51, the nays are 0. This bill having received the requisite constitutional majority is therefore passed by substitute. All right, we're going to take a slight break till 2 o'clock, a lunch break till 2 o'clock. We will stand in recess till 2 p.m. sharp, and then we'll get rolling with the rest of the calendar.